Chapter 1968. The Alliance's army remained motionless, waiting for news here. The only thing that comforted the 5 dynasties was that no domain had left. This was the most basic perseverance, but no one knew how long this perseverance would last. Time passed slowly, and everyone was waiting anxiously. Time, which usually passed in the blink of an eye, seemed to be moving very slowly now. They were all waiting for the first boot to land, but no matter how they waited, it did not come. According to their estimation, it would not take more than 10 days to travel from the star of comet to the nearest domain through the reverse space. Of course, the first ambush had to be based on the time and distance. This was because the purpose of the ambush was to show the Alliance. Of course, there was no need to be secretive about it. The best method was the simplest one. The first one to attack should be the closest one. This was a normal judgment, but no matter what it was, as long as it touched the sword lunatic, it would definitely become abnormal. 1 month, no news. 2 months, still no news. 3 months, still no news. A Buddha who was burning with impatience couldn't hold it in any longer. Is our judgment right? Does the Crimson Sword vein really have the courage to plunder Buddhist domains everywhere? Can it just admit defeat? Run away? Or just hide in another base that we have not yet grasped? The 5 dynasties remain motionless like mountains. No! If it was just the Crimson Sword vein, what you said might have happened. But if there was a Xin Yuan swordsman leading, then they would definitely not be cowards, let alone run away. This is their philosophy, and it has not changed for tens of thousands of years. Now that they have come to the eastern sky, it has changed. Impossible. He still persisted, but the others might not be able to do the same. Another 10 days passed like this. Suddenly, a warning came from the sky. The 5 dynasties were captured in their hands, and with a sweep of their divine sense, they were immediately open to everyone. There was a Buddha with a sorrowful expression. Fate Awakening Dharma World? How could it be the Fate Awakening Dharma World? It doesn't make sense. Although we are not the furthest from the star of comet, we are definitely not the closest. No matter which aspect we choose, this does not make sense. Is it a personal grudge? This was the Buddha of the Fate Awakening Dharma World. His domain had won the lottery, but he really could not understand the reason behind it. Why was it them? A Buddha from another realm was more rational and quickly realized that something was amiss. Something's wrong with the timing. Considering the distance between Huaxing and Yuanjue, even if they set off in advance, it would take at most a month and a half for the news to spread. Now, 100 days had passed. This was a surprise attack, not an outing. How could they be so slow? Was he deliberately mystifying things? Or was there a dispute midway? Another Buddha joked, if we're talking about time, running all the way from the origin world is just right. No one thought that his explanation was reliable. This was war, not travel. At their current level, which domain did not have the ability to easily open a direct and reverse space passage and fly in the reverse space? They were very familiar with the star chart, including the negative space, and of course, the crimson boundary. It did not make sense for them to run for 100 days when they had the ability to solve the surprise attack in a month. Was his brain rusty? Or more than 1,000 people rusted together? Of course, they didn't know that there was indeed a certain pretentious criminal who had gone crazy. The most unreliable joke was actually the truth. Such a method of surprise attack made people completely unpredictable and unable to find the pattern of target selection. Seeing everyone's eyes looking over, the 5 dynasties sneered, well, if we want to draw a psychological sketch of this person, then we have already made the first stroke. This person is used to not taking the ordinary path and belongs to the kind of character who takes the unconventional path. The more normal the consideration, the more he disdains to use it. Everyone, just this first attack has already brought us a lot of information. Now, the range of choices he has been greatly reduced, right? Hearing this, everyone felt that it was indeed very reasonable. So, following this train of thought, they began to guess his next move. After one or two more attacks, the general situation would be revealed. Some of the more quick-witted ones said, if this is the premise, then Crimson's next choice will definitely not be the one closest to Unveil's Dharma realm. Of course, it is also impossible for him to deliberately choose the one furthest away. Given that his purpose has been exposed, the time and distance will still be an important basis for him to consider. So, excluding the closest and those that are too far away, we have about 7 targets, of which 5 are the most likely. We can split up once. 2 out of 5, Master, do you want to rush over? Now, time is life. The 5 dynasties were unmoved. Calm down, the probability of 2 out of 5 is still not enough. We need to be confident, we need to see more clearly. Otherwise, if we make a mistake once or twice, our morale will be completely gone. Everyone was silent. The 5 dynasties were right, it was impossible to draw a complete picture of a person with just one stroke. They still needed more information about his personality and habits, so where the second target was chosen was very important. The Alliance's strength could be split up once, and they could still crush Crimson's sword vein, but any more and it would be very dangerous. So in reality, they could pounce on 2 targets at the same time. They continued to wait, but in the waiting crowd, the monks of Unveil's Dharma realm were somewhat restless. Their homes had been plundered, the losses were unknown, and the casualties were unknown. Even these bodhisattvas and Buddhas who had attained the Tao could not maintain their usual mentality. The Alliance had agreed to share the loss of resources equally, but this was in terms of materials. What about the loss of manpower? How would they share it? This time, the answer came abnormally fast. About 10 days later, the next warning came: the Bitter Tree world had been attacked, and the losses were heavy. The monks threw themselves at the star map, looking left and right, front and back, but they could not understand. A Buddha said bluntly, this order is completely reversed, right? The first surprise attack gave up on the near and went for the far, but the second time, they chose the closest target. Shouldn't it be the other way around? There were also those who were dissatisfied. Why are you drawing a picture of a madman? Facing everyone's gaze, the 5 dynasties found that they had been led astray. Originally, they were trying to determine the whereabouts of the Crimson Man, but now it became how to prove that their vision was not blurred by old age. The second portrait of this person, he always surprises us. This is a characteristic that cannot be grasped, but in view of this person's unpredictable actions, we can at least use the method of elimination. The 5 dynasties found that they could not keep up with this swordsman's thinking. The rules and regulations formed by thousands of years of cultivation always made them consciously and unconsciously rush left and right, and when the other party's goal was revealed, only then did they realize, oh, so that's it. But after that, they were still confused. This was the problem of the fixed thinking. It was not something that could be changed immediately if you wanted to. His wisdom could be maximized within this framework, but once he jumped out of this framework, he seemed to be somewhat powerless. He was like this, but in fact, it was the same for others, because they were all cultivators who lived in the same framework. So in the end, he could only use the method of elimination, the stupidest method. At the same time, he sent an invitation to his half-immoral friends. If you want to deal with people whose thinking did not fall within the framework, you can only rely on those who were also outside the framework. Chapter 1969. The various Buddhas of the Alliance spoke enthusiastically. With the rhythm of one near and one far away, then the next time, it's very likely that he will look for it in the furthest realms. Since this person doesn't take the usual path and is always unexpected, why can't he go near and far? I thought that he would still go to the closest realm to ancient tree world because no one thought of it. What do you mean no one thought of it? Haven't you already thought of it? So according to the master's portrait, your thoughts are not reliable. Has everyone's thinking become rigid? Why did they have to start from a distance? There are still many ways to start, right? For example, the order of joining the Alliance is actually the degree of enthusiasm of Crimson. Yuan Ju and Ancient Tree are the first batch to join the Alliance. Does that mean that Crimson will only attack the backbone of the alliance for the time being, those who are the most hostile? If that's the case, there are still 3 families in the first batch to join the alliance. Isn't the scope of consideration much smaller? Some argued. Senior brother, you're wrong. The biggest characteristic of the master's portrait is that there is no order and no pattern. When you find the pattern, he will change. For example, you said that he chose from the first batch of realms to join the alliance, then why can't he change it to the second or third batch? The reason is very simple. The last ones to join are often the least interested in this operation. Then if we attack them, it will stimulate their impulse to return to the realms. So I think that we will attack whoever joins last among the 16 families of the alliance. Someone suggested a new idea. Can we use Crimson as the center and draw 2 semicircles? Maybe we can see his next move, someone said disdainfully. Good idea. Then junior brother, tell me, where do we cut the semicircles? In theory, there are countless positions. In the midst of the argument, a figure appeared among the group of great Buddhas of the alliance. Everyone politely greeted him. The young monk returned the greeting, very polite, as if he was a junior. 5 dynasties let out a long breath. Junior brother hands-free, you're finally here. We're discussing the next location of Crimson Sword Vein. Monk hands-free smiled slightly. Did you find anything? 5 dynasties lowered his voice. A chicken's mouth is a crow's mouth is a chicken's mouth is a chicken's mouth is a crow's mouth. I said that we can use the elimination method, and guess what, they included the remaining 14 realms. Each of them had their own reasons and pretended to be serious. It really makes one speechless. Shanti could not help but laugh. Senior brothers are all joking. He also wanted to laugh. The great Buddhas of the 5 dynasties came from the Great Sage Heavens, which was one of the strongest Buddhist realms in the Western Heavens. Its size was comparable to Zhou Xian in the Eastern Heavens. As for him, he was born in another powerful realm in the Western Heavens, the small Sumeru realm. Although its name was small, it wasn't small at all. If the Great Sage Heavens could be seen as the Zhou Xian of the Western Heavens, then the small Sumeru realm could be seen as the 5 rings of the Western Heavens. Their individual strength was especially strong. The attack on the Scarlet Star this time was actually led by the Great Sage Heavens. It had nothing to do with the small Sumeru realm. However, as the 2 Great Sage Heavens and Great Sage Heavens, the 2 Great Sage Heavens and Great Sage Heavens still maintained a good relationship with each other. When the 5 Great Sage Heavens were in trouble, the small Sumeru realm's loudspeaker had rushed over at their request. Loudspeaker had rushed over out of camaraderie, but also out of selfishness. If it were another demi-immortal, regardless of whether they were in the interior or exterior realm, he would not have bothered to make a move. Whoever shat on them would have to clean up after them. Why should he take the lead and clean up after them? There were no benefits, but now that they were in trouble, they thought of him in the small Sumeru realm. The key was the name of the shit-stirrer, so he had no choice but to pay attention to it. He had actually severely offended such a person when he was in the exterior realm. Although no one had mentioned this karma, the more it was like this, the more it would have to be resolved sooner or later. For cultivators of their level, this was something that could not be avoided. He had to solve this problem. There were 2 ways. If little Punk Lu made a mistake, he would erase him. If he didn't, he would help him. No matter what he did, it was a way to resolve the karma. It depended on the situation. This was the principle of demi-immortals. The big goal was fixed, and the small goal was determined by the changes in the environment. They would not lock themselves in a fixed pattern. Not only would it be too tiring to live, but it would also be too tiring to cultivate. Friend or foe? It might be a very accidental choice. Just like when Hands-Free came here, he wanted to try how to eliminate this big karma. If he succeeded, it would greatly improve his reputation in the Eastern and Western Buddhist sects. He might become the benchmark of Buddhism in the future. If he couldn't, then he would choose to resolve the karma, make some compensation, and express goodwill. Even if they couldn't become friends, they wouldn't be enemies either. In the future, there might be a possibility of cooperation. If this was the case, it was also a kind of success, a very practical success. This was cultivation. There were many paths, each with its own advantages and disadvantages. The only thing you needed to remind yourself was not to fix yourself to a dead end. The 5 Dynasties Alliance's Buddhas told them all the nonsense, suggestions, and strange things. So, junior brother hands-free, what do you think? If it were you, where do you think they would choose? Hands-free smiled. I have worked with Inspector Liu for several years in the exterior realm. In my opinion, forgive me for being blunt, but even if you divided into 10 teams, I'm afraid you wouldn't be able to catch him. That's because you actually missed out on a very important place, the Scarlet Star. All the Buddhas were greatly shocked because this was indeed a direction they hadn't considered. Why not? There were a large number of people left behind by the Alliance on the Scarlet Star. Eliminating them could not only vent their anger, but also give hope to the people of their home planet and maintain the existence of the Sword Vein. Most importantly, it would be safe. No one would think that they would kill their way back to their home planet. This was the result of thinking rigidly. Everyone was still in that frame and hadn't completely jumped out. But with Hands-Free's reminder, all the Buddhas immediately felt that this was very likely to be the next target of the Scarlet Buddha Sword Vein's surprise attack. Hands-Free wasn't as sure as them. To him, this was the most inconceivable direction that he could think of with his wisdom. The significance of this to him was that, if the Scarlet Sword Vein really came, it meant that the general trend was with him. He would contact some half-immortals and bet on this round to strangle this freak in the Western Paradise. This was a response to the heavens. If the Scarlet Sword Vein didn't come and went to a place they didn't expect at all, it meant that the general trend wasn't with Buddhism. At least, at this time and place, it wasn't with Buddhism in this incident. He wouldn't endlessly try and intercept it. That wasn't the way of half-immortals. He would directly meet the swordsmen and mediate between them to appease this matter. This was also a response to the heavens. Hands-Free's general trend wasn't there, and the members of the Alliance probably wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. If they guessed wrong again, there was only one path left, which was to go home and fix fences and walls. They had to take care of their own nest first. Chapter 1970. Lu Xiaoyi returned to the Crimson Swordsman group. The swordsmen were all looking at him. Although they wanted to know which half-immortal it was, no one asked. That would be impolite. But there was one thing. They were more at peace. Because they saw the backing of the strong queen. No half-immortal would pay attention to the Crimson Swordsman, but Lu Xing was different. When he came, the focus of the matter seemed to have changed. It was no longer about the Crimson Swordsman. It was a very inexplicable feeling. A Taoist half-immortal. Lu Xiaoyi played it down. So, you don't have to worry about the half-immortal's position in this matter. What you need to worry about is how you can continue to kill without being intercepted. I said that I won't interfere in the battle of the cultivators in the main world. This is your own responsibility. No one can help you. I can't. Even Old Yun can't help you. The Crimson Swordsman nodded silently. They knew very well that in the Western Heaven, no one could compete with Buddhism in terms of the number of half-immortals. So, if someone like Lu Xing really intervened, it might not be a good thing for their future. Dragonpool said softly, "Xing, time is tight. So, let's start now? We still need 2 months to return to the Crimson Star." Lu Xiaoyi didn't move. He originally wanted to give up the right to choose the next target, but Duan Li's arrival made him feel danger. The hands-free monk was here and was very familiar with him. After being with him for several years, this person's thoughts were very deep. If it was just him, it didn't matter where he went. But now, the battle between them had begun to shift to the Sword Vein. If he was caught, he, Lu Xiaoyi, would lose this contest and be kicked out. If he couldn't catch him, Buddhism would have to come over and ask for peace with the Sword Vein. There was no need to communicate. This was a feeling in the dark. Besides the Crimson Star, do you have any other backup plans? Everyone was very surprised. Did Xing change his mind? It was normal. His half-immortal friend must have brought him some news that made the Crimson Journey impossible. The world of persuasion, the world of three virtues, the world of solitary radiance. That's about it. We don't know which one is the safest, because we don't know the whereabouts of the other party. The monks of the Alliance are not to be trifled with, especially the leaders of the 5 dynasties. They are scheming and astute. Lu Xiaoyi looked up at the starry sky and sighed. I'm a perfectionist. No matter what he did, he hoped to do it perfectly and leave no regrets. If I recall correctly, your storage rings weren't even filled to the brim when you first snatched the Fate Awakening realm, right? Longtan Zhaojian understood tacitly, official Xing is right. If there's nothing wrong, then there's more to be done. If there's something wrong, then there's something wrong. Since it's not full, let's go back and fill it up again. This time, the heaven and earth membrane will be broken by us. I don't think it will be too difficult. The Crimson Swordsman entered the negative space and disappeared. To Lu Xiaoyi, there were only 16 realms. Including the Crimson Star, there were a total of 18 choices. In theory, the probability of the other party guessing correctly was not high, but he would never gamble on luck unless it was absolutely necessary. Moreover, the Western Heaven Buddhist sect still had the strength to divide their troops at least once. He only cared about absolutes. Especially when there were so many people following him. His personal strength was enough for him to deal with danger, but these people could not. Once they encountered the main forces of the Alliance, the Bodhisattva realm would not be able to escape, and more than half of the Buddhas would be lost. After a battle, they would no longer have the capital to hunt and rob. He had to ensure that they were absolutely safe, because as long as they persevered for 1 or 2 rounds, the Alliance would definitely be the one to perish. There would definitely be people who would want to go home regardless of the consequences. He would also achieve his goal of dividing the Alliance, and the following negotiations would be a matter of course. In an environment like the Western Heaven, negotiation was the only way to solve the problem. What was the hands-free monk thinking now? Or would he wait for him at the Crimson Star? If I want to be shameless, I can snatch the Fate Awakening 3 times. Outside the Crimson Star, in a hidden place, the Alliance's army was waiting. There was a sense of uneasiness in the atmosphere. It was anxiety, worry, nervousness, and blindness towards the future. Such an atmosphere had appeared since the beginning when the Crimson Man changed his profession to become a space bandit. It was getting thicker and thicker, so thick that it could not be resolved. It was not something that could be resolved by everyone sharing the losses. In order to show that victory was in their hands, the 5 dynasties played a game of chess with the hands-free monk. They played a game of chess every few days, steadily and surely, showing their determination and patience that were different from ordinary people. The Buddhas gathered together and watched the 2 of them play chess. They felt that the cultivators from the Buddhism world were truly different from the rest. Not everyone was able to calm their minds during every major event. Day after day, the disputes among the bodhisattvas gradually increased. There were thousands of people, and the atmosphere was too oppressive. The disciples of Buddhism also had tempers, especially the monks from the Fate Awakening Dharma realm and the Bitter Tree realm. Their tempers were especially bad, but they could not be blamed. Their homes had been destroyed, so who would have the patience to wait here and watch people play chess? Of course, the 2 of them had calmness, and it had nothing to do with their realm. Who would be different? In such a wait, everyone became more and more confident. Because if they set off from the Bitter Tree realm, the nearest realm would be within half a month through the negative space. The news had not come, which meant that the target of the Crimson Man's attack this time was not near, but far away, including the Crimson Star. The Crimson Star was about 2 months away from the Bitter Tree realm. Now that more than a month had passed, the probability of the enemy choosing the Crimson Man was getting higher and higher. The 5 dynasties placed a piece with a relaxed expression. The hands-free monk laughed. Senior brother, you seem to be very happy. Do you feel that you have full confidence? The five dynasties asked in return. Junior brother, why do I feel that you have the least confidence in your own suggestion? Do you not believe in yourself? Or did you overestimate the swordsman? The hands-free monk shook his head and gently placed a piece down. Senior brother is wrong. I have been underestimating Inspector Liu all this time. Every time I want to correct my view, I find that my correction value is always some distance away from reality. Cultivators can't boost the morale of others and reduce their own prestige, but some people can't be judged by common sense. The marching monks are like that, and now they have made it difficult for themselves to return to the interior realm. It's very embarrassing. The five dynasties asked, now that half a month has passed, and judging from the distance, the probability of the Crimson Man coming is getting higher and higher, isn't it? The hands-free monk sighed. Senior brother. There are many ways to travel. You can't just use time to measure it. Some people take big strides, while others deliberately dawdle. This Crimson Swordsman group took 100 days to travel from the Star of Explosion to the Fate Awakening realm. How did they travel? Did they crawl? Senior brother, have you forgotten the lesson of the past so quickly? Chapter 1971. The five dynasties were shocked. He had really forgotten about this matter, but he was still stubborn. That was the beginning of the first realm. No one knows, so of course they can do as they please. But after the first attack, time is of the utmost importance to both sides. They won't be in the mood to wander anymore. I'm sure. Hands-free smiled. It's good that you're sure. Actually, I also support you. They continued to play chess, but the five dynasties' hearts were in chaos. When another half a month passed, a warning came. The old Buddha's face was ashen. But no one opened it. Because according to the schedule, the Scarlet Swordsman should have appeared here, but they didn't. He knew that he had guessed wrong again. He stared at hands-free in front of him. I can't choose 2 out of 15. Because the opponent is a lunatic. But what if I choose 4 or 6 out of 15? His meaning was clear. If the Alliance army was divided into 4 or 6, even if they didn't have much of an advantage against the Scarlet Swordsman, they could only delay the opponent. This was already a life-and-death situation. 16 realms to kill one, but they were still forced to this extent. It really made people speechless. Hands-free sighed. Senior brother, forgive me for being blunt. Even if I gave you 6 choices, you still wouldn't be able to choose. The five dynasties' monk robes moved without wind. Obviously, the depression in his heart had been suppressed to the extreme. Junior brother hands-free, I won't blame you. I know that you still have a backup plan. If you can't encircle them this time, you'll use the name of the small Sumeru realm to mediate. It's all your name in the small Sumeru realm. Fine, I won't fight with you. But the great sage heavens worked so hard to form an alliance here. We can't just end like this, right? Do you dare to bet with me? I bet that if I divide the army into 6, I'll definitely be able to stop the Scarlet Swordsman. If I still can't guess correctly, you can take my position, and the great sage heavens will have nothing to do with this alliance. You can negotiate with me as you wish. But if I'm right, I'll fight again. I'll divide the army into 4 and bet on the fate of the Western Heaven Buddhism. You can't stop me. Hands-free was calm. Senior brother, you're thinking too much. If you go against the swordsman, you're afraid that you'll lose your mind. Disaster will come. Even the exterior immortal monarch lost his position because of him, let alone you, the so-called leader of the alliance of the main world Western Heaven? Fine, I'll do as senior brother wishes. Let's not guess 6. To show the small Sumeru world's friendship with the great sage heavens, you can choose 8. As long as 1 out of the 8 is the one mentioned in the warning letter, I will give up my original plan and go crazy with you. But if you still can't guess it correctly, then don't persist any longer. This is the final stage of the epic changing. Isn't it good to pass the burden to the younger generation? Hands-free's words not only shamed the 5 dynasties, but even the great Buddhas at the side felt uncomfortable when they heard it. Once upon a time, the sun god great Buddha of the origin world had become a has-been old man who was looked down upon by others. The 5 dynasties struck out with their palms. Good. If my guess is wrong, then I will abdicate and wholeheartedly support Junior Apprentice Brothers' negotiations. Now that the two of them had made the oath, the group of great Buddhas started to quarrel with each other. Among them, a portion of them still hoped to continue the encirclement, but most of them had already decided to retreat. Their home was more important than anything else. But the problem now wasn't here. It was the bet this time. There were 16 realms. Excluding the 2 that they had already snatched, and the Scarlet Star was no longer a possibility. That meant that they had to choose 8 out of 14. If they still couldn't make the right choice, then they couldn't help but wonder if their intelligence was enough to survive in the unpredictable universe. The 5 dynasties closed their eyes in concentration, while the surrounding Buddha sect members were deliberating in silence. Everyone had a list of the 8 realms in their hearts. They wrote down their names and showed it to them, not to bet or give them hints, but purely to test their own eyesight and judgment. Some of the more arrogant ones only wrote down 6 names, or even 3 or 2. Some of the more arrogant ones only wrote down 1 name, as if they were the only ones who were clear of the chaos in the universe. But the 5 dynasties didn't follow their lead. He only relied on his own intuition, abandoning all conjectures, analysis, and deduction. He wrote down his 8 choices purely based on his intuition. Then, everyone's eyes were fixed on hands-free, meaning that he would be the one to open the warning letter. Manti sighed softly. Hundreds of great Buddhas of the sun god were confused by a sh*t stick, which was also a wonder in the cultivation world of the universe. With so many people, even if some of them guessed correctly, what was the use? Who should they listen to and not listen to? So he said, I won't guess anymore. I feel that I can't guess it either. Then, everyone, please take a look. With a wave of his hand, the warning letter opened in the air. The words on it made all the great Buddhas present feel ashamed. Fate Awakening Dharma Realm. 200 great Buddhas guessed nearly 1,000 names, but none of them got it right. I'm going to find someone to negotiate. Is there anyone who wants to come with me? If not, then go back to your own homes. At least we can resist one wave. It's a bit embarrassing to be robbed before the negotiation is successful. This was purely a crushing of intelligence, crushing the dignity of every great Buddha to pieces. Their battle intent was long gone. The monks from Fate Awakening and Bitter Tree World did not even say goodbye and just left. They could not be blamed for being rude. After all, their homes were robbed. Who knew what would happen to them? Especially Fate Awakening Dharma Realm. It was really fated. In such a short period of time, it was robbed twice. Who could they find to reason with? Once something like this started, there was no way to stop it. The Scarlet Swordsman's whereabouts were so strange. Who dared to say that their home planet would not be their next destination? As for the negotiation, they would leave it to the Great Sage Heavens and Little Suir World. Anyway, they had already left. Who would care about these things? A failed alliance would have a far-reaching impact. At least, there would not be another alliance like this for thousands of years. This included the Scarlet Planet now. The cultivators of the alliance had all left. If you were still here when the negotiation was over, you would be courting death. No one would be able to save you. Only the 5 dynasties did not leave. I'll go with you. I want to see what kind of monster this is. Miendy did not want to reject. Senior brother, are you still thinking of sketching this swordsman's character? The 5 dynasties shook his head. I understand now. You have no way of sketching a person with intermittent mental illness. I think he doesn't even know what he is doing. I just want to see this person. I want to see this person who is so depressed that he can only fall apart without even meeting him. Miendy gave a kind warning. Senior brother, I have to remind you. Don't be fooled by this person's cunning. Don't think that he is someone who likes to use his brain more than his hands. The fact was that the strength under his control was even more terrifying than his schemes and plots. If you want to make a move, please forgive me for not being able to help you. Senior brother, you have to know that the reason why I insisted on negotiating is because the Taoists have already started to make their move. Not only in the realm level, but also in the realm of half-immortals. The bet was just a joke. I wouldn't bet such an important thing on the fate of the underworld. It is because your alliance is progressing too slowly. You have already missed the best time. It is time to stop. Chapter 1972. Lu Xiaoyi stood in the void and waited quietly. Not far away, Duanli didn't hide his presence at all. It had been 2 months since the last robbery in the Dharma realm. The Buddhist half-immortals of the Western Heaven should have found their way here. Duanli wasn't here to help Lu Xiaoyi as a friend. In the Western Heaven, any agreement couldn't be separated from the participation of the two giants, Buddhism and Taoism. Otherwise, the effect would be limited, incomplete, and not binding enough. In the distance, there was an aura fluctuation rapidly approaching. Then, 4 figures appeared in their line of sight. There were 3 half-immortals and 1 sun spirit. Lu Xiaoyi was unfamiliar with the other 2 half-immortals. Obviously, they were evildoers from the exterior. Lu Xiaoyi stepped out of the crowd and went up to greet him. As 2 people who had worked together in the exterior realm for several years and were both the chief and second enforcers, they still had a normal friendship. However, some things were hidden in the heart and would not be shown on the face. Hands-free said Amiba. The exterior genius was about to part ways. I didn't expect us to meet again so soon. It seems that I'm really fated to meet you. You're a mysterious dragon. Since you've come to the Western Heaven this time, let me do my best as a host. Lu Xiaoyi said with a smile, I'm ashamed. I've just come to the Western Heaven and I'm already treated as an unwelcome guest. I don't expect to be treated well. I'm already thankful that I'm not kicked out. The 2 of them talked and laughed as if they were old friends who had not seen each other for many years. They were exceptionally close. After discussing the follow-up of the exterior's Heaven's Heart Plate and the departure and stay of the interior's masters, they quickly entered the main topic on hands-free. This was because he knew Inspector Lu very well. He liked to do things in a straightforward manner. It was not good to be secretive. About the Crimson Sword vein, what do you think? Lu Xiaoyi didn't hide anything. To be honest, I'm here on a personal matter on the exterior Heaven's 5th Decay Senior's request. I'm just passing by. Since I've encountered you, I had no choice but to extend my hand. It's an old habit of the sword vein. I hope you can understand if I do it more intensely, Grandmaster. This was something that had to be explained clearly. Half-immortals had keen senses, but they weren't immortals after all, so it was impossible for them to know everything. In the cultivation world, the most taboo thing was to have unclear movements. It was very easy for misunderstandings to arise, which would lead to endless disputes that would get out of hand. This was not the situation in biographies and novels, where one needed to constantly create contradictions in order to continue the plot. In the real world of cultivation, it was best to make things clear. The major disputes were basically Tao disputes, not all kinds of inexplicable misunderstandings caused by poor communication. Lu Xiaoyi's words had 2 meanings. First, the Scarlet Star had the support of the 5 Decay's mighty ones in the exterior realm. She was not a nobody who could be bullied by others. If you Buddhists want to destroy Crimson, then you must consider this relationship. The second meaning is that I'm not here with some kind of mission to purposely stir up trouble in Western phenomenon and create conflict between Buddhism and Taoism. But if you must force me to do so, then I don't mind stirring up trouble in Western phenomenon while I'm at it. Hands-free understood. To him, the small mountain realm was not involved in this matter, so there was no psychological pressure for him to stop. This dispute is a problem left behind by history. It's regional in nature and doesn't involve the root of the orthodoxy. Crimson Sword vein should belong to us Buddhists, so it's normal for us to have some small conflicts behind closed doors. As for misunderstandings, it's better to clear them up. As for fights, everyone has their own losses, so there's no need to be so calculative. In the future, everyone will travel the universe and make a living in Western phenomenon. It's better for everyone to take a step back, which is more conducive to the stability of Western heaven. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Master, you're right. Crimson belongs to the Buddhist sword lineage, so of course it should belong to the category of Buddhism. But it's just that this big family is a little ruthless. Even if it's a real family, how many times can they withstand such changes and not have the desire to stand on their own? Hands-free said firmly, before the change of the era, there won't be any more similar alliances. The words of the great sage heavens and the small mountain realms still count in Western heaven. But the small conflicts between the realms are their own affairs. We won't interfere. What do you think, Lord Lu? Both sides had the intention to stop fighting, but they also had their own bottom line. Hands-free's meaning was that he could let go of anything, but the Crimson Sword vein could not be separated from the Buddhist system. Because once it was separated, it would inevitably fall into the embrace of Taoism. This was something that Buddhism absolutely could not tolerate. Lu Xiaoyi's feelings were, in fact, that Buddhism was not Buddhism. It was more of a nominal thing. If Western heaven's Buddhists valued this, then he would give it to them. He valued the part related to the sword more. In his opinion, whether it was Buddhism or Taoism, the main thing was to be able to turn one's heart to the sword when something really happened. As for what hat to wear, of course, he would wear a Taoist crown in the Eastern heaven. In the Western heaven, he would shave his head. What was the big deal? Hands-free's promise to not join forces with Western heaven's Buddhists to suppress them was his goal. As for realms like the fate-awakening Dharma world and the bitter tree world, as well as realms that would inevitably fight to the death with Scarlet in the future, those were unavoidable. If Scarlet could not deal with the alliance, then there was really no point in existing. This was a kind of exchange. He had to pay a price to maintain the overall situation and comply with the false reputation of Buddhism's leadership in exchange for his own safety. There was no need to wait for the era to change. When Tu Muyun could come from the exterior world, there would naturally be arrangements, and he would not have any responsibility. Both sides had their own gains and losses. It was hard to say who was at a disadvantage, depending on which perspective you looked at it from. From Scarlet's point of view, this was already the best outcome. Scarlet's star was protected, and in the future, they would not have to face the pressure of the alliance. This was the best outcome that could not be better. They did not even dare to think about it before. But with Lu Xing's participation, the impossible became possible. From the alliance's point of view, they had made concessions. They had wasted a lot of time and resources, and they had ransacked two realms. Even though they clearly had the upper hand in terms of strength, they were still willing to reach such an agreement. It was more or less a bit anticlimactic. It was also because of this that Hands-Free had a small request. In the Western Elephant Heaven, the small mountain realm can be considered a little famous. I heard that Hands-Free's path of punishment is extensive, and you have also studied the essence of Buddhism. Are you willing to come and experience it? I'll be your guide and be your host. His meaning was clear. The reason why he was willing to agree to such conditions was not because of anything else, but because of Lu Xiaoyi. It was because he was willing to make friends with such a person that he was willing to compromise on the agreement and suffer some losses. Firstly, it was to smooth over the grudge between him and Lu Xiaoyi. Secondly, it was to make friends with a strong vision heaven in the small mountain realm. Xin Yuan Sword Vein was not something Scarlet could compare to. It was a truly powerful force in the universe, and no one would refuse to have something to do with such a force. As for Taoism and Buddhism, under the different elephant heaven, they were somewhat insignificant. The key was that there was no visible conflict of interest, so why did they have to be hostile towards each other? In this sense, great cultivators who had reached a certain level would be able to see it clearly. It was difficult to become friends if one ate from the same pot, it was difficult to become enemies if one ate from different pots. It was a simple principle. Chapter 1973. Lu Xiaoyi knew that he couldn't reject it. It didn't mean that the agreement wouldn't be valid if he rejected it. The agreement would still exist, but how to implement it would be a problem. What was an alliance? 16 sects were an alliance. Did 3 or 5 sects count? They wouldn't make such a big deal out of it, with Yuan Zhu and Ku Shu as the leaders, and occasionally call in a few other sects to fight against Scarlet. This was a reflection of the influence of the Great Sage Heavens and the Little Su realm. As long as they were willing to suppress it, such a regional incident would definitely not occur. At most, the two victims and Scarlet would be at each other's throats for a long time, and they would be able to control the scope of the incident to a certain extent. Therefore, he couldn't reject it. Of course, understanding Buddhism and Scarlet and going to Little Sumi domain were two completely different concepts. The Western Elephant Heavens was a place where Buddhism flourished, and the Little Mustard World was the top Buddhist existence in the Western Elephant Heavens. Basically, it could be said that it was the crown of Buddhism in the entire universe. It was very necessary for him to go to such a place to learn the Tao of Buddhism. It would be a waste not to learn. As for the danger, it didn't exist. With the hands-free guide, it was equivalent to Little Sumi domain endorsing him. It was his guarantee of safety. The cultivators gathered together. The Great Holy Heavens, Little Sumi domain, Scarlet Star, Lu Xiaoyi represented the Xianyuan sword vein, and Duanli represented the Western Taoists. Everyone signed the agreement, and the agreement was formed. Of course, they didn't include Lu Xiaoyi going to Little Sumi domain as a guest. That was something that wasn't mentioned. After that, this agreement would be spread everywhere, including the 16 sects. When it came to fighting, they didn't even have a say in the agreement. This was the tragedy of being manipulated by others when they weren't strong enough. Lu Xiaoyi returned to the Scarlet Swordsman group and said, "I'm leaving. Old Yun's matter has come to an end. You can only rely on yourselves for the rest." More than 10 great Buddhas were paying their respects, and one of them stood out. "Thank you for your help. Scarlet will never forget this kindness. We understood the meaning of the Imperial Envoy." In this period of time, the Imperial Envoy had not mentioned the Battle of the Diana Sword. But through this battle, we saw it clearly. Be it Tao or Buddha, they were just outer appearances for others to see. It was a trick. As a sword vein, what we need to uphold is the swordsman's heart. Only by persevering on this point would one be able to find one's place in this chaotic world. It doesn't matter if you're wearing a Taoist robe or a cloak, the only useful thing you can do is to hack with a sword. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Always remember this. We are swordsmen. This is our route. No matter what day it is, don't change. He didn't linger and leaped to Duanli's side. I'm going to the small Sumeru realm to abstain from meat and pray to Buddha. I wonder how the ladies there are like. Duanli burst into laughter. The small Sumeru realm will regret today's invitation one day. They haven't really understood what it means to invite a wolf into the house. Speaking of ladies, the small Sumeru realm is too old-fashioned. It's better to go to the Great Holy Heavens. Of course, I've only heard about it. I don't dare to go there, so I won't accompany you. Hands-free was his enemy, just like how the marching monks were to Lu Xiaoyi in the eastern sky. He wouldn't feel jealous just because Lu Xiaoyi was going to the small Sumeru realm as a guest. He wasn't that shallow. He was truly worried for the monks. This grandson of his was not a good guest. Especially when he wanted to bring him home. Are you sure you've hidden all the good things at home? Both of them were very clear that similar disputes in the origin world would become less and less important in the future changes in the universe. They were already half-immoral great cultivators, so they shouldn't pay too much attention to these trivial matters. Cultivators at their level should not be involved in the traditional disputes of the so-called heavens and the so-called realms. They had to have their own status as half-immortals. The stage should be the stage when one's level is the stage. You are already a professional player, why are you still running to kindergarten to find a sense of existence? Seeing Lu Xiaoyi wave his hand and leave, Duanli shouted from behind, don't forget, in a few decades, the immortals of the interior realm will appear. It's a rare opportunity. Don't miss it. Lu Xiaoyi came in front of the two Western Sky cultivators and introduced them to him on hands-free. This is senior brother Wu Chao of the Great Holy Heavens. He's the famous virtuous senior monk of the Western Sky. The alliance this time was also arranged by him. The early stages were quite smooth, but when you came, it was incomparably depressing. Isn't that so? I just want to see what kind of person is able to toy with the senior brothers of the 5 dynasties in the Western Paradise for over 1,000 years. Lu Xiaoyi was very modest. It's just a spasm, a spasm. But I don't dare to say it's a spasm. It's hands-free's fault. If I had found him earlier, we could have sat together drinking tea and chatting. Why would I have needed so many twists and turns? In the end, this person hid his intentions and hid from me from beginning to end. As a result, there was a lot of trouble below. Wu Chao nodded. Junior brother Handsfree's thoughts have always been many. He's famous in the Western Sky. Lord Lu, I came here shamelessly because I have some questions in my heart. I won't be happy if I don't ask. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Great Master is too modest. But please speak frankly. I won't hide anything. Wu Chao stared at him. The Scarlet Plunder's movements must have come from Lord Lu's hands. I just want to know why you guys walked for more than 3 months when the distance between Destiny and Star Explosion was only a month. Was it intentional? Or was there some other reason? Lu Xiaoyi laughed involuntarily. How could it be so complicated? I just kept going forward and forgot about the negative space. You also know that I'm not familiar with the Scarlet Sword vein. They had some scruples. As for me, I had to put on some airs. So I ran like this for 3 months without any rest. Wu Chao was speechless. He had thought of countless reasons, but he never thought that the army would be so sloppy, as if it was child's play. Then, the second time you went to the Bitter Tree World, you found out that there was a negative space to borrow, so you returned to normal? Lu Xiaoyi was a little ashamed. That's right. If I could save some time, I would save some time. I was advised by others. Wu Chao continued to ask, why did you go back to plundering Destiny again? Did you sense danger? Or was it purely a coincidence? Were there any considerations in this? Lu Xiaoyi expressed his regret. He felt very sorry for letting the old man guess wrong. Originally, we wanted to kill our way back to the Scarlet Plunder. Later, the swordsman said that it was our first time plundering, so we were unfamiliar with it. Our plundering of Destiny was not very satisfactory. We were too nervous, too careless, and too rushed. So everyone decided to plunder again. Yes, to leave a more professional impression on others. Handsfree laughed heartily at the side. This was the unreasonable part of cultivation. If one's thoughts were too deep to deal with a careless person, the result would often be like this. But, was it really because they were doing it casually? Not necessarily. Chapter 1974. The small Sumeru realm was not part of Lu Xiaoyi's itinerary. He was not someone who could be easily manipulated, much less be coerced. However, in terms of understanding the Tao realm, the Buddhist Tao realm was the most important part of his cultivation. It was a problem that had to be solved first. Therefore, to him, the small Sumeru realm was a place that was worth a visit. That was because the group of people who had the deepest understanding of the Buddhist Tao realm was there. Others said that there was always someone to learn from, but he would learn from wherever he went. He did not care if you were a Taoist or a monk. He was not picky at all. This was a kind of temperament that ordinary people could not learn. Lu Xiaoyi had been to many realms, including many Buddhist realms. However, it was his first time seeing a realm like the small Sumeru realm that was filled with the aura of orthodoxy. This was an innermost embedded world that was rarely seen even in the universe. What did it mean? On the surface, it looked like a miniature spiritium domain. It was so small that it was probably the size of an ordinary human city. The larger meteors and the smallest planets were less than 10,000 feet in diameter. They were surrounded by a thick layer of gas and looked like a giant Buddha's head. Its secret was inside. As the saying goes, Mount Meru hides a mustard seed, and the mustard seed hides Mount Meru. Although it was small on the outside, it was huge on the inside. It was actually an embedded dimensional space. However, this dimensional space was open, and the exit was in the space of the main world outside. It was very strange. This was a treasured land, especially suitable for cultivation. Because the size of the realm outside was too small, relatively speaking, it could achieve the ultimate defense. Lu Xiaoyi could feel that even half-immortals could not break through the membrane of heaven and earth here. It was a pity that such a treasured land had fallen into the hands of the Buddhist sects. For millions of years, the Buddhist sects of the Western Paradise had nurtured countless outstanding monks. Historically speaking, the Western Paradise's Buddhist sects had even surpassed the great sage heavens. Hands-free was very proud. The small Sumeru realm has never been conquered. In fact, very few people have even tried. It is a wonderful place, a realm of good accumulation. Of course, in the eyes of your sword vein, you will definitely say that only a realm that has been conquered is a good realm. Because it is more ancient. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Master, you know the sword vein very well. That's right, we would definitely think so, but it wasn't because of the beauty of the vicissitudes of life. In the Taoist philosophy, there was no such thing as an entire world, and no one was perfect. Perfection itself was the greatest imperfection. Flaws were also a part of everything in the universe, and a very important part at that. Because that meant change. Because of its flaws, it was invaded. Because of the invasion, it was revived. This represented a self-healing ability. Just like a person, bleeding at an appropriate time was beneficial. It could train the body's hematopoietic function. However, if you didn't use this function for a long time, once you lost too much blood, it meant that you would lose the ability to recover. It's a beautiful domain, but it must have a flaw. Can you tell me where it is? The hands-free was straightforward. No. I'm afraid that my originally small flaw will be turned into a big hole by you. The two of them laughed heartily as they sank into the realm. I'm definitely not the first Taoist to come to the small Sumeru realm. But I thought that there wouldn't be many Taoist guests here. What's the point? The speaker said meaningfully. Lord Lu was right. The small Sumeru realm has never been a hospitable domain. It values orthodoxy more than other Buddhist sects. Therefore, those who can enter must at least be invited by the great Buddha. Only friends can enter. Once you enter, you'll realize that they are not wary of friends. It doesn't matter if you're wearing a Taoist robe or not. In the history of cultivation, how many monks and Taoists wear Taoist robes? With the speaker's invitation, the true face of the small Sumeru realm unfolded before his eyes. He was very clear about the speaker's intention. It represented many things: the so-called involuntary cooperation between the exterior masters and the marching monks, personal relationships, the hope to strengthen the connection between the small Sumeru realm and the 5 rings on the cosmic level in the future, possible cooperation. All of these were understandable. He was also willing to cooperate. Because his opponents were not Buddhists, but some higher goals. He couldn't even be sure who they were and which forces. It was a group of interests, including Buddhists and Taoists. Looking at the small Sumeru realm from the cosmic void, it was only the size of a meteorite. But once he entered, he realized that it was a different world. This was a large space that could even be compared to the 5 rings. Auspicious clouds lingered, and faint Sanskrit chants could be heard. Lu Xiaoyi carefully experienced it and couldn't help but laugh. This is actually the main world. But it's not an independent space. The rules of the heavenly Tao are also the rules of the main world. It's like digging out a piece of dimensional space. The miraculous nature of the Creator is truly breathtaking. The speaker smiled. Lord Lu, you have sharp eyes. Come, let me introduce you to the virtuous eminent monks of the small Sumeru realm. Here, Lord Lu, you can stay as you wish. You can also stay for a long time. I hope the small Sumeru realm can leave a good impression on you. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. It's better if it's not too good. Otherwise, I won't be able to control myself and will want to snatch it. Great Master, please introduce me to the virtuous monks of the world. Although I cultivate the sword, I'm not unfamiliar with the essence of Buddhism. I might have to stay for a while to see the true wonders of Buddhism. What he meant was that he wanted to stay for a while. This gave the speaker a lot of face. Otherwise, if he hurried over, it would just be for the sake of the contract, which in itself would represent alienation. Since Lu Xiaoyi gave him face, the speaker naturally had to return the favor. The small Sumeru realm is big. There's nowhere you can't go. If you don't mind, there's a large-scale Dharma assembly right now. That's the best opportunity for you to enter. The two walked side by side, chatting and laughing as they left. There were countless ways to seek knowledge in the cultivation world. Among them, the most impossible method was the method of fighting one family at a time. Did they take others for fools? But there was one method that was the most popular and the most effective. It was the method of visiting scholars. With the goal of improving each other, it was a pure exchange of Tao realms. But this method had high requirements for the scholar. You had to be really capable and be able to do what others couldn't. Only then would there be value in the exchange. Otherwise, if you couldn't even speak a few words, you would sound like a big idiot. Who would want to learn with you? Lu Xiaoyi was blessed in this aspect. He had more than 10 Tao realms in his hands. Among them, there was no lack of genuine Buddhist Tao realms. For example, merit, impermanence, reincarnation. These were the weapons he used to exchange with the monks. This was a rare place to improve one's Tao realms. Merit, nirvana, karma, and so on. With the best teachers, there would be the best students. Tao realms were things that needed to stand on the shoulders of giants and look forward. It wasn't something that needed to be groped from the beginning. He cherished such opportunities very much. Chapter 1975. The universe, according to its own laws, was unwavering in change. Everyone knew that change was imminent, but they did not know where it would start. Some were fast, such as some astronomical phenomena, collapse, rebirth, acceleration, chaos, but some were slow. Cultivators gradually realized that those who were under the constraints of the existing Tao realm were more stable. The rapid changes in astronomical phenomena were due to problems with the foundation of the 5 ties, but those who did not rely on the 5 ties were still stable, such as the exterior and exterior heaven. Smoky Puppet returned to the interior heaven, and 2 friends welcomed her. Western Elephant Heaven? Why did that guy go so far away? I was wondering why he didn't come back after almost 100 years. Did he go wild? Shiyu laughed. This is the news that Duanli brought back from the Western Heaven a few days ago. According to our guess, he was thrown there by the exterior heaven immortal. You know Senior Brother Lu's temper, he definitely won't come back. Smoky Puppet frowned. Even the immortals won't come back? Or did he cause trouble in the Western Heaven again? Shiyu shook his head. I can't guess. But he didn't seem to cause any trouble in the Western Elephant Heaven. When he first went there, he fought for the sword vein in the Western Heaven. Later on, as he fought, he became one with the Buddhists. Now I heard that he's with the hands-free monk and they're stuck together like glue. Is he too happy to think about home? Qing Xian snorted. He definitely won't come back, because he's not interested in such immortals. Watching others become immortals is like watching others marry and enter the bridal chamber. Some people like it, some people would rather do it themselves. He's the kind of person who likes to do it himself. As for being one with the Buddhists, sooner or later, the Buddhists will have nothing to wear. He's going to steal the Tao realm. Don't I know him? He's just like that bamboo hat guy, he wants to eat a fatty in one bite. He can't wait to collect all the 36 great Daos and create his own new toy. Smoky Puppet came back this time to see the immortals appear. Actually, for half immortals like them, they understood that other people's immortals were other people's. Since the beginning of cultivation, there had never been an identical immortal ascension routine. Not to mention the spirit, there wasn't even a resemblance. They would still come, looking for that feeling, that touch. On the surface, there were people like Lu Xiaoyi who didn't care at all, but there were more who looked at it rationally. It was no secret to his friends that Lu Xiaoyi was accumulating Tao realm. In fact, everyone was accumulating Tao realm, but he was not the only one. It was just that he was accumulating more and less. There were not many people like Lu Xiaoyi who had crossed the boundary of Taoism and Buddhism, not only in terms of perception and understanding, but also in terms of opportunity and time. The purpose of accumulating Dao states was to give himself more choices, or to form a new innate Dao through the combination of Dao states. With 36 innate Daos, there would definitely be changes. There would be new Daos and also some that would be eliminated. In fact, the number of innate Daos might not even be 36. Therefore, clinging onto an innate Dao was very dangerous because you might be clinging onto a Dao that would no longer be an innate Dao in the future. Unless you could resist the universe's changes with your own strength, that would be impossible. This was the consensus in the half-immortal world. Therefore, combining Dao realm was very popular. There were many new Dao realm methods. But until the very last moment, who could say for sure? They knew that Lu Xiaoyi had accumulated a lot of Dao realm and was a little desperate. In the interior heaven, the bamboo hat was the same as him. But regarding the bamboo hat and Lu Xiaoyi's relationship, Gu Qingxian did not mention it to anyone, especially to Yan Chang. He was afraid that this tough woman would pick up her sword and attack. He was never worried about Lu Xiaoyi picking up a sword, but other people could not. They were too far apart. You guys are thinking about that bamboo hat again? I'm curious. Just because he's accumulating Tao realm? Yan Chang knew that Qingxian did not have a good impression of this person, but she did not understand why he always feigned civility with this person. If there was a grudge, just settle it. Was there a need to drag it out? Qingxian explained, that's not thinking, it's flattery. It's praise. He can become a half-immortal as a yin spirit. In the interior heaven, he's the first one. I admire people with such abilities. He knows when to advance and when to retreat. He's much better than that stick Lu. Yin Chang looked at him suspiciously. She did not believe his nonsense. Beside her, Shiyu laughed. The flattery of the three pure ones should be called lifting high, understand? Lifting all the way, then pulling out the ladder. Yin Chang was speechless. The three pure ones and the supreme ones were like this. They were too mean, but they definitely had a purpose. If it was the enemy of these two people, they would not beat around the bush. They could not do it. The only reason why they went through so much trouble was to stand up for someone. In the interior heaven, who else had the qualifications to make them spare no effort for almost 100 years? If they had the chance to catch that guy, they would definitely interrogate him. She knew that they did not want her to know. There were many reasons. Their impulsive temper was probably the first one. Regarding this, she had always pretended not to know. It was not easy to interfere in that guy's affairs, not because she was afraid of trouble, but because she was afraid of causing trouble for that guy. This was the attitude of the three people in the fifth ring on the bamboo hat. Only Qingxian knew, but the other two people had already noticed it and then did something bad together. However, Yin Chang was obviously not as bad as the other two, so there were still some things that she did not understand. This time, the demi-immortal monsters are also allowed to participate in the exhibition of the immortals because we have contributed to the way of heaven when we were in the exterior heaven. But what I don't understand is, why would you allow those cultivators who have not participated in the exterior heaven to participate? Don't tell me that you are broad-minded and have something bad in mind? The exhibition of the immortals in the interior heaven was held once every 360 years. It was the most important group activity in the interior heaven. There were not as many Dharma assemblies here as there were in the exterior heaven. Basically, everyone practiced their own cultivation. The exhibition of the immortals was almost the only chance for everyone to gather. Those who could enter the interior sky were half immortals of the interior realm, and they would have the opportunity to observe. This was not a bad thing, but the distance to observe would depend on one's own ability. The half-immortals were very outstanding, but this only referred to the future. In terms of their current strength, there was still a practical gap between them and these famous Yang God half-immortals and Second Severance half-immortals. They still did not have the ability to compete with these interior realm seniors with their own abilities. There were thousands of demi-immortals in the interior heaven, but there were only a few dozen good spots. The remaining demi-immortals could only queue from the nearest to the furthest. When one's turn was 500, the so-called observation was no longer an observation, but a feeling. If Lu Xiaoyi was here, he might be able to fight his way in with his own strength. However, the other monsters, including Qing Xian, could not do it. They were only around 500. If they wanted to get to the front, they could only rely on special cases. This was because during the Dharma assembly that was held when the monsters first came to the interior heaven, they moved the top 6 of the immortals to get 6 places in the front. Chapter 1976. Of course, only those who had been to the exterior realm were qualified for these 5 special cases. This was a matter of course. It was also the rule of the cultivation world. However, there were still some people among the geniuses who were stirring up trouble. The group led by Marching Monk knew that they had already lost the support of the first batch of geniuses, so they naturally set their sights on the new half-immortal geniuses who had joined in the past 100 years, as well as those who weren't part of the Heavenly Eyes organization. Unexpectedly, he had also recruited a group of people. These people were also interested in the immortals, but unfortunately, there was no way around it. At this moment, Marching Monk took the initiative to give up his spot. Firstly, it was to fulfill his promise, and secondly, it was to avoid controversy. There was a rumor that the half-immortal geniuses should be considered as a whole. If Lu Xing was here, he would definitely give his place to someone else in order to show the friendship of all the interior geniuses as a whole. If Lu Xiaoyi was really in the interior realm, no one would have thought of such nonsense. However, it was precisely because he was not there that some of these fantasies became reality. Moreover, Marching Monk gave up his spot. Everyone knew that Qing Xian and Lu Ting were in the same boat. How he handled this matter was crucial. If he refused to give up his spot, he would offend the new batch of half-immortals. If he chose to give up, he would leave an impression of incompetence in the eyes of the old demons. It was a real dilemma. Qing Xian's response was very natural. Weren't there 6 spots? Those who were willing to give up their spot could do so. However, as Lu Ting's friend, he made the decision to give up his spot. This move successfully weakened the group of demons of the interior realm and emphasized the choice of individuals. It was also a very suitable response. The spot was given up, but who it was given to became a problem. As the most abnormal demon in the interior realm, Bamboo Hat was the target of Marching Monk of the Buddhist sect. Marching Monk was very clear that the spot of Taoism would never be given to the Buddhist sect. Therefore, after some maneuvering, he created momentum for Bamboo Hat, which led to the fact that Bamboo Hat got the first spot. It was acceptable to outsiders because he was the only one who became a half-immortal through Yin spirit. He was the only one in the interior realm. However, Yanmu knew that Qing Xian could still stop them because Lu Xiaoyi's influence in interior heaven was still far greater than that of Buddhism. Junior sister, are you blaming us for not reserving a spot for you? Qing Xian remained calm. Smokey shook his head. In theory, Little E and I are from the same sect. It's natural for me to go to his position. But you know that I won't go. I just don't understand why that Bamboo Hat. There are many other better choices, right? Qing Xian smiled. I understand, I understand. You swordsmen have a bad temper. You're not greedy for food. Why didn't we stop the bamboo hats from ascending to the throne? There are some other reasons. Xiu continued, actually, it's just a feeling. The universe is in chaos, and the epoch is about to change. All sorts of chaotic phenomena are present, and no place can remain unaffected. Judging from the drastic changes in the celestial phenomena of the main world and the disturbance of the heart plate in the exterior realm, there's no reason for the interior realm to remain peaceful forever. Smokey was taken aback. The immortals will have a problem? How come no one else noticed this? Qing Xian snickered. No one noticed, my ass. Those old guys at the second severance are all shrewd. Why did they give us 6 spots at the spiritual conference? Did they really think they were all good people, helping the younger generation? There's a trap buried here. However, these premonitions only belonged to those old cultivators at the second severance. They wouldn't say it out loud. Whoever was unlucky deserved it. One less competitor was one less competitor. Since that's the case, why are we fighting over this spot? If it wasn't too obvious, I'd even want to give up my spot. Smokey looked at the 2 cunning guys. You all know, little E, Qing Xian rolled her eyes. That thing is more shrewd than a monkey. That's why EF** King didn't even come back. Because if he came back, it would be too obvious if he actively gave up his spot. When have you ever heard of Enforcer Lu spitting out something that he had already eaten? But he asked me to take care of you. If you don't fight for the spot, then you don't have to say anything. If Junior Sister has any doubts, then I'll dissuade you. Smokey scolded jokingly, you guys are all bad. So you're all working together to trap the Buddhists? Qing Xian said righteously, how is this called a trap? It's a premonition in the first place. It may happen, and it may not happen. Not to mention us, aren't those old guys at the second severance also keeping silent? Who knows, they might even have that great perseverance, courage, and fearlessness to charge forward. In terms of cultivation philosophy, if everyone retreats and I charge forward alone, it's also a kind of disposition to accomplish great things. We can't stand in their way. Smokey was amused, and said, I think the 2 of you have this kind of disposition. Xiu shook his head like a rattledrum. I don't have the disposition. I'm afraid of death. Qing Xian was awe-inspiring. As friends, Lu Tong should get such a great benefit first. If we don't fight with him, that's too unfriendly. Smokey was puzzled. In the interior heaven, it's fine if you have an ordinary background, but can't you see those with extraordinary backgrounds like the marching monks of the Buddhist sect and my auntie? Xiu explained, we can see. We definitely can see. But even if we see, why should we say it? The 2 of us have no choice. If we don't stop you, Junior Sister, Senior Brother Lu will definitely make trouble for the 2 of us later. If we were in the state of 5 rings in the past, with the relationship between 5 rings Taoists and Sword Vane, how could we possibly warn you? Not to mention you, Senior Brother Qing Xian won't even tell me. He can't wait for the others to be unlucky, and for him to be the only one to prove great Tao. Qing Xian said angrily, how can you say that? At most, I'll lend you a hand when you're down on your luck and owe you a favor. How can you speak so casually without telling the truth? This is also because we, the 3 pure ones, are soft-hearted. If we chase that bastard Lu Tong away, he'll definitely throw stones at us when we fall into the pit. Xiu agreed from the side. That's right. Senior Brother Lu has done many things like hitting someone when they're down, and is very skilled, Smokey understood. There were many reasons why the marching monks had stood up for their bamboo hats. They were disgusted with Lu Xiaoyi's group, and actually didn't have any good intentions towards the bamboo hats themselves. After all, there was a gulf between Taoism and Buddhism. You, a god half-immortal, are very impressive. You want to be the evildoer of evildoers and suppress others? You didn't show up when there was trouble. You didn't show up when inner and outer Jing Tian confronted each other outside Han River. You hid when the outer Jing Tian was being punished. Now that there are benefits, you're starting to show up? The marching monks' goal was uncertain, so they could accept any result. If something happens, you deserve it. This is a lesson: kill the self-righteous momentum. If you get benefits, you have to thank us Buddhism for supporting you. No matter what the result is, Buddhism is the winner, so it's a waste not to take advantage of them. The key is that the support behind you is not strong enough. You want to show off when you don't have the backing? If not you, then who? Chapter 1977. The ranking of the immortals in the interior heaven was in full swing. For most of the demi-immortals, their abilities had not yet reached the level where they could accurately perceive the universe. They also did not have the support of a powerful force, so they were ignorant of all this. The rhythm of the competition was the same as before. The evildoers were also fanning the flames, but they were basically in the state of being bystanders. Their purpose was to participate, so it was not good for them to set goals and plans for themselves. They were the main characters in the main world, but they still had a long time to become the main force in the interior heaven. Amidst such chaos, as the day of the immortals' appearance drew nearer and nearer, the approximate position and ranking gradually became clear, and gradually, the chatter died down. The 3 people of the 5 rings were all in the top 500. This was Yen Chen, and she used true ability. Qing Xian had not done her best, so everyone gathered together and prepared to watch the fun from afar. Together with them were Bei Feng, Qi Fan, Yu Du, and the others. There were also those who rushed forward based on their ability. No one could control their personal choice. The evildoers occupied the front row. There were 6 places: Bamboo Hat, Duanli, Speakerphone, Hong Tian Gang, Third Watch, and so on. Among them, only Bamboo Hat was closest to the core of the immortal circle because his position was obtained from Lu Xiaoyi. Back then, Lu Xiaoyi was the first in the immortal circle, so his position was naturally different from the other 5 places. Everyone settled down and quietly waited for the immortals to appear. Everyone knew that as the universe changed faster and faster, there would not be many opportunities like this. Every time they saw it, there would be less of it. It was hard to say whether the interior heaven would still exist after the real change of the era. It was also unknown whether the immortals represented by the immortals were still around. Who knew? Under the gaze of all the demi-immortals, an immortal world was slowly sliding to the center. It was the 5 Flowers Celestial Mountain. In the history of the 5 Flowers Celestial Mountain after the interior heaven was formed, there had never been an immortal world that appeared in the center of the interior heaven. This was not a rare occurrence in the interior heaven. In fact, most of the more than 3,000 immortals in the interior realm had never shown their immortals before. They were only there to serve as a foil. Among the 3,000 immortals, most of them were internet celebrities who had repeatedly flown to the center to show off their immortals. Even more were those who were unknown. The 5 Flowers Immortal Mountain was such a low-key immortal. Its master who became an immortal was the 5 Flowers Immortal Elder. He was also not famous and kept a low profile. In the knowledge of the half-immortals, it seemed that they had never heard of such a person in the immortal court. He was on the immortal list but had no official position. This was the treatment of ordinary immortals. Comparatively speaking, the immortal monarch of the inner and outer scenic sky, Heavenly Eye Immortal Monarch, and the immortal monarch in charge of the 4 symbol sky were all registered figures with positions. They could be considered to have some status in the immortal court. As the universe was changing and nearing the end of the era, such an unknown immortal's immortal miracle had slid into the center of the interior heaven. The significance of this was very memorable. Wuhua Immortal Mountain? I've never been there. Is it the root of the 5 elements? Qifan asked. He had only been in the interior heaven for about 100 years. It was still a short time, so he didn't know all the 3,000 immortals in the interior heaven. In fact, even an old person might not know every immortal mountain, especially those that had never shown themselves. However, Qing Xian was a know-it-all. It's not the root of the 5 elements. It's the post-celestial leap Earth Great Tao. It's also not based on the 5 elements, but the combination of the 5 elements Great Tao state. Smokey's heart skipped a beat. She understood Qing Xian's implication. The 5 elements had already collapsed. Was this going to have consequences in the immortal world? In the interior heaven, every master of the immortal world walked the ancient path. For example, the most famous beheading 3 corpses. However, they each had their own strengths in the Tao state. In fact, none of them were based on the 36 pre-celestial great Taos. The reason was unknown. It was probably because the body of the interior heaven couldn't withstand these golden immortals' immortal transformation. The half-immortals here were watching the immortal world announcement. In fact, they weren't watching the Tao state, but the process of the final beheading. That kind of indescribable thing that couldn't be passed down on paper. What ancient method did deity Wu Hua use? This time, the person asking was Yudu. Ever since the exterior heaven's punishment, he and Qifan had completely invested in the Lu Xiaoguang group. Hanging out with the second-in-command Qing Xian and the others was an inevitable choice. If one wanted to stand out among the half-immortals, one had to have the capital to do so. So far, there weren't many who had such capital. Duan Li was one, Hong Tiangang was another, and probably Mantai was another. Of course, the one who was in the limelight the most was Bamboo Hat. When he became a half-immortal, he was in the in-spirit realm. That was quite abnormal. Qing Xian was omniscient. The ancient method used by deity Wu Hua is quite special. It's the triple quenching of the oven. It's considered a high-risk immortal ascension method in the ancient method. There's no retreat in the process. If there's a slight mistake, you won't even have the chance to regret it. That's why it's rare. It's also the reason why the 5 Flowers Celestial Mountain hasn't been able to float into the center of the immortal world announcement since the interior heaven. The triple quenching of the oven was to use the cultivator's body as an oven to forge oneself. At every stage, one would need one's own body, cultivation base, elemental force, spiritual will, Tao state accumulation, physical body refinement, and even some very special external treasures. One would burn and refine oneself to call forth new life. After doing this 3 times, one would be able to ascend to the top. Of course, the premise was that there couldn't be a single mistake in the process. The pursuit of perfection to the extreme, the conditions were quite harsh. There were too many methods in the so-called upper realm of the ancient method. The definition of the cultivation world was that other than the method of the waning realm, all other immortal ascension methods were counted as ancient methods. It could be seen that it encompassed a wide range of things. Among these countless ancient methods, there were also differences in popularity, difficulty of immortal ascension, and high and low realms. Among them, the corpse-severing method was the best among the ancient methods. Not only was the immortal ascension method high in quality, but it was also possible to repeatedly try it. The other immortal ascension ancient methods also had their own wonders, but compared to the corpse-severing method, they were inferior. For example, the triple quenching of the oven was the most unpopular method. The success rate was very low, the immortal ascension method was not good, the process was extremely dangerous, and it was very picky about the cultivator's talent. It belonged to the category of methods that were gradually being eliminated among the ancient methods. It had no practical significance. Since the development of cultivation until now, even the half-immortals of the interior heaven who advocated ancient methods were not willing to use such ancient methods to achieve immortal ascension. Therefore, there was a profound reason why they always floated outside and did not enter the center. But this time, the 5 Flowers Celestial Mountain finally squeezed out other web celebrity immortals, such as the 3 Corpses Immortals, the Portrait Immortals, and so on. It made everyone's imagination run wild. Of course, with the changes of the universe, all kinds of abnormalities occurred frequently. It was normal for the interior heaven to have demonic moths, but it would be abnormal if they didn't. A celestial mountain that had never floated into the center had squeezed in this time. It didn't seem to be a big deal. Chapter 1978. A few days later, the 5 flowers Immortal Mountains slowly entered the center of the interior realm and started to slowly rotate. Its aura became high and mysterious. In everyone's eyes, the 5 flowers Immortal Mountains seemed to have turned into a huge furnace, burning fiercely. This wasn't a real burning, but it was better than a real burning. They thought that if it really burned, it wouldn't be able to burn the souls of the spectating cultivators. However, this kind of burning of the cultivators' consciousness seemed to be able to burn everything. The closer they got, the more they could feel the pressure of burning everything. However, none of the half-immortals retreated. This was the reason why the half-immortals of the interior realm were keen on watching the immortal world announcements. Even if they knew that this kind of process of ascending to immortality wasn't something they would experience in the future, during this kind of process, that kind of feeling of floating in the air was truly unstoppable. During this process, they could see the senior immortals fighting against the heavens for longevity, fighting against nature for spring. After going through untold hardships, they strived with all their might and broke through the limits of human freedom. All living things competed for freedom under the frost sky. It was a kind of transformation of the body, a sublimation of the spirit, and a fusion of the Tao realm with the laws. How could a mere furnace's fire burn away the hearts of the half-immortals that surged more than the fire? Raging fire, burn my ruined body. This furnace's triple quenching has a hint of heresy and evil. I'm guessing that Immortal Wu was triple quenching probably couldn't do without some kind of ceremony of unity. A large-scale burning heaven assembly can play an important role in his self-forging. She was very sharp. When the immortal world announcement started, he had a fairly accurate judgment of Immortal Wu Hua's ancient method. Qing Xian smiled. In the ancient times, it wasn't new to gather people to burn fire to worship the heavens. There was even a realm where all the cultivators raised a fire together to send the ancestor to immortality. However, that was in the ancient times. It's impossible now. No one can use the sacrifice of thousands of cultivators to achieve their own goals. It's true that it's an evil sect now, but it might not be in the ancient times. Therefore, this method can't be passed down. The price is too great. They were far away, so their perception of the 5 flowers Immortal Mountain was still superficial. They could only say that it was sour and salty, like grapes that couldn't be eaten. Smokey curled his lips and said, "Senior brothers, you were already full of bad ideas when you gave the position away. Now that it's really started, you're starting to be jealous. You must be feeling uncomfortable seeing someone so close to the immortal sign, right?" Qing Xian sneered, "Just watch. Was it so easy to take advantage of him? I have a feeling that something is going to happen during the immortal's announcement this time." It was rare for Xiu to agree. Senior apprentice brother is right. As the saying goes, fortune and misfortune go hand in hand. The 5 flowers Immortal Mountains were still undergoing drastic changes. The flames of cultivators burned the heavens and scorched the earth. The entire 5 splendors celestial mountain was surrounded by a layer of light. Vaguely, the Tao realms within changed in a myriad of ways, and it displayed the ability of the 5 cosmoses to evolve. This was the pinnacle attainment of an immortal in the 5 great realms. Among the half-immortals here, very few were proficient in all 5 great realms, but the bamboo hat was a special one. He had a special opportunity, and his understanding of the Tao realms was the same as Lu Xiaoyi's. He had already kept up with the rhythm of the collapse of the great Tao, and even surpassed Lu Xiaoyi's. This was because he was also very proficient in nirvana. Only he could barely keep up with the rhythm of Immortal Elder Wu Hua's burning of himself, and learn from it to perfect his already deep understanding of the Tao realms. This kind of realization made some kind of connection between him and the burning 5 flowers Immortal Mountains, and they began to synchronize. The Tao realms were synchronized, and the flames were also synchronized. In the eyes of the other half-immortals, it was as if the flames of the 5 flowers Immortal Mountains were extending outwards, but it was only burning the bamboo hat. This was the first time in the history of the interior realm. The immortal sign was just a sign, a kind of replay of what had happened in the past, and it did not really exist. Then, how could it be connected with the half-immortals who were watching? This completely violated the principle of the energy balance of cultivation. In everyone's surprise, the flames on the bamboo hat became more and more intense, and soon became the same as the 5 flowers' immortal mountains, becoming 2 bright balls in everyone's perception. What? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Look at what the 2 of you have done. This bamboo hat will either be destroyed by the flames and die, or he will take a step further, and this great opportunity will be caught by him. The 2 of you, including little E, have misjudged. Xiu became even more jealous. I can't see clearly. It should be a resonance with immortal Elder Wu Hua's Grand Tao of the 5 flowers. There are 2 questions here. Can the immortal sign be extended? If this guy gets something, then someone will definitely lose something. If it's not us who are watching the show, then who can it be? The Grand Tao of the 5 flowers has already collapsed, and their resonance of the Tao realms actually has no theoretical basis. If this continues, what will happen? No one answered, but everyone had an answer in their hearts. And the answer was unexpectedly the same. You do let out a long breath. Is this killing the immortals? Or is it the legacy of the immortals after they die? Qing Xian's expression was grim, and he also realized something. It could be said that his little plant seemed to have become someone else's ladder. In the 2,000 years of cultivation and planning, this was the first time he had made a major mistake. Although the results were theoretically both good and bad, he had a bad premonition. It was very likely that he had been taken advantage of. If there is an immortal death, then there must have been a sign. When the 5 flowers immortal mountain began to fly towards the center, the fate of immortal Wu Hua was already decided. The current performance is only the last glory of immortal Wu Hua. Of course, it could also be his resistance. If the bamboo hat gets involved, it will speed up the process of the immortal death. Because immortal Wu Hua's understanding of the Grand Tao is not completely the same as that of a newcomer like the bamboo hat. Normally, immortal Wu Hua's Grand Tao realm is purer and more authentic, but now, the universe has changed, and the Grand Tao has collapsed, so, the unlucky one can only be immortal Wu Hua. He is hopeless. Now the question is, how much can this bamboo hat get from it? When an immortal falls, there will naturally be a legacy of fate. There are also many mysterious and unspeakable things that will dissipate and spread to the universe. Most of them will disappear, but some will be found by a lucky person, and that is a great opportunity. Bei Feng suddenly spoke up. If senior brother Lu was here, sitting in that position, would such an opportunity be his? Smokey shook his head, resolutely and decisively, no. If little E is here, he will do his best to help immortal Wu Hua fight for his last chance of survival. He will not care about what he can get from it. As for this bamboo hat, it looks like he is cooperating with the resonance, but in fact, he is leading it to the real situation. He does not have good intentions. Qi Fan sighed, it is still senior brother Lu who is righteous. Smokey curled his lips, righteous my ass. He wants to take in a little brother in the immortal world. As for why he doesn't want to take advantage of it, the reason is very simple. He doesn't care about the legacy of an unknown ordinary immortal. Qing Xian laughed. Lu often says that the one who gives birth to him is his parents, but the one who knows him is his senior sister. These words are not false, that fellow's thoughts have been seen through by senior sister. Chapter 1979. The onlookers were no longer watching a show, but watching the struggle of an immortal. What Qing Xian and Yan Chuan could understand, how could the old guys here not understand? They were all old demons of several thousand years, and there were more than a few second severance. Their judgment of the situation could only be more precise and profound, but no one would interfere. This was not only a rule, but also a taboo. Was it so fun to casually interfere in the process of an immortal's fall? Unless your knowledge of the 5th Grand was above that of the bamboo hat, Don't even think about it. Immortals would die, and it was hard to say for the bamboo hat, but those who interfered now would definitely not have a good ending. This was the insight that every half-immortal had to have. They could only watch, appreciate and comprehend such a rare process of an immortal's fall. This was a completely new experience for everyone. But what they weren't sure was, would there be more and more such experiences in the future? Everyone was thinking that since the interior heaven, cultivators who could truly take a step forward by observing the announcement of the immortal world were rare. Then, could they also think that this kind of announcement of the immortal world itself had no meaning to their upper level? What was meaningful was the fall of the immortal world, which had more practical effects. As long as your knowledge of the Tao realm matched that of the immortal world, it might be very dangerous, and they might die along with the immortal, but compared to what could be gained from it, what was this kind of danger? The result of all this would depend on the final performance of this half-immortal freak. Thus, no one stopped them from harassing him. They couldn't, and weren't willing. 5 Flowers Celestial Mountain, after a short period of equilibrium, began to become unstable. This was expected, because the 5th Grand had already collapsed, and many things that deity Wu Hua had once relied on as a cornerstone had already changed. When the bamboo hat followed this change, it was also the beginning of deity Wu Hua's collapse. The bamboo hat's actual situation was not as easy as he appeared. The one who was connected to him was a genuine immortal, an existence that he had never come into contact with before. But riches and honor came from danger. He understood this principle from the first day he started cultivating. Why did he come here? He was not as lost and ignorant as others thought. He was very clear about the little tricks of Buddhism and Taoism behind his back. It was just that his performance was like a little white rabbit. But this little white rabbit of his had fangs. Marching monks are pretentious, hypocritical, and have great ambition but little talent. Ma Bailu, a fly that seeks personal gain, a fox that exploits the tiger's might, a hypocrite. Neither of them was a good person. She was holding back her evil intentions towards him. He accepted it all. Because what he loved the most was to turn the tables in a hopeless situation. Since the day he started cultivating, it had been his only weapon against his enemies. So what if he came from a powerful background? Arrogant, conceited, and self-righteous. Did he think that he could run amok in the universe just because he was born into a good family? The higher one's realm was, the more they had to look at themselves. He looked down on these two people. In his mind, there was only one person in interior realm that he was really afraid of, and that was the mysterious Lu Xiaoyi. Lu Xiaoyi, thick-skinned and shameless, hiding a dagger in his smile, swindling others, saying one thing and thinking another, two-faced and full of evil. Although this position originally belonged to Lu Xiaoyi, now that he had taken it, he was not grateful at all. Because this was a trap to harm him. Lu Xiaoyi might not have known, but this indifference made him even angrier. Did he think that because he picked up something he didn't want, he was inferior to others? When he really achieved something, he would make these so-called noble people regret it. Deity Wu Hua could not escape this calamity. He was in the burning Tao state of the deity Wu Hua, so he could clearly feel this. This was the inevitable result after the collapse of the 5 ties. All the immortals who used the Tao state of the 5 ties as their foundation were among them. It was just a matter of time. Persimmons had to be pinched softly, and the heavenly Tao was the same. Deity Wu Hua, who had the weakest cultivation, was such an unlucky person. In the process of the collapse of the universe, under the accumulation of the dissipation of the great Tao, his cultivation was at the bottom. His Tao state was the fusion of the 5 ties to form the postnatal nourishing earth great Tao. Under the rapid and continuous collapse, his Tao foundation was finally damaged. After persisting for hundreds of years, he still could not escape this calamity. With or without his bamboo hat, it was already set in stone that he would stick the pole in the end. On this point, it was already destined when deity Wu Hua began to move towards the center of the interior realm. This meant that somewhere in the 4 sacred heavens of the immortal court, deity Wu Hua began to use the body of Tao. There was a mysterious connection in the unseen world. In order to pay respect to this immortal, the interior realm had this shift of the celestial mountain. When the bamboo hat used his knowledge of the 5 ties to resonate with deity Wu Hua, he understood this clearly. Therefore, he did not feel any guilt, and also knew that he would not have any karma because of this. He thanked Marching Monk for giving him this opportunity with ill intentions. He thanked Ma Bailu for his hypocritical half-heartedness. When they saw that he had this opportunity, their intestines would turn green with regret, right? He felt endless heat in his body, as if his spirit was burning. This was the mischief of deity Wu Hua's ancient method of immortal ascension. The furnace was quenched 3 times. The immortal showed that this was the 3rd quenching, and it was also the most thorough burning. If the bamboo hat wanted to gain something from it, he had to bear the pressure at the same time. This was not what deity Wu Hua wanted to give him. It was impossible for him to only receive benefits and not bear the pain. Even if it was extremely dangerous, and he had a slim chance of survival, he had to endure it. This would open up a whole new world for his future. In the distance, the few people watching were somewhat dejected. Yu Du asked, if this bamboo hat can endure it, do you think he will become a Yang God? Or another step to become a second severance? Seeing that everyone was looking at him, Qing Xian had already returned to his usual calmness. He was still waving his fan, but if he knew about the bamboo hat's evaluation of him, would he still be so calm? He will be a second severance. He has only just advanced to the primordial spirit realm, and his foundation is not enough. On the ancient method of immortal ascension, one walked on 2 legs. One was Yin God, primordial spirit, and Yang God, and the other was 1 step, 2 steps, and 3 steps. Under normal circumstances, one would first walk the path of Yang God, but in this chaotic universe, under the chaotic heavenly Tao, everything was chaotic. Beifong clicked his tongue. 1 step for Yin God, 2 steps for primordial spirit, then doesn't that mean that when he reaches Yang God, he will directly become an immortal in 3 steps? If I remember correctly, this should be the fastest speed to become an immortal in the history of the cultivation world, right? Qi Fan smiled. It is indeed so in the history of the modern cultivation world, but it does not include the ancient and ancient times. At that time, there were people who succeeded in becoming an immortal in 1,000 years. Even in the recent ancient times, there were people who did it within 2,000 years. Xiu humphed. I have only heard of cultivators who live longer than others, but I have never heard of anyone who lived faster. The king of hell likes to be in such a hurry to reincarnate. Chapter 1980. Amidst everyone's astonishment, a miracle happened before their eyes. They personally witnessed the fall of a celestial and the birth of a second severance freak. Miracles were often like this. There would be more occurrences in the first and last time, and then countless people would chase after them. Then, would this kind of transformation of the interior heaven become the mainstream method of upper realms in the future? This was what many half-celestials really wanted to know. The 5-flower celestial mountain gradually collapsed in the burning. This was a true collapse, but what collapsed was not the substance, but what was originally inside the celestial mountain. From a celestial to a mortal, from prosperity to decline, if the interior heaven would still exist for a very long time, the 5-flower celestial mountain that had lost its celestial lattice could be absorbed by other celestial wonders in the long passage of time, and finally disappear. This was the erasure of traces. The 5-flower celestial mountain would not be the only one, it only represented a beginning. Next, there would be even more celestial wonders falling into the mortal world. But what had to be noted was that the existence that would be erased was only the celestial wonders of the interior heaven. It itself was a kind of projection of great power, and when the great power was no longer present, the projection would naturally disappear, but in reality, the realm where this celestial elder 5 flowers was famous, the famous celestial mountain would not be affected too much. This was the difference between reality and projection. In the end, the interior heaven was a scene that had been created. It was far more affected by the changes of the universe than its actual existence. The line of silent words, was this going to rise? Half-celestials began to disperse. The announcement of celestial wonders this time brought a very big impact to everyone, and they needed to go back and digest it, and think about the future. Celestials would fall when the foundation of Great Tao was no longer there, which meant that the changes of the universe had already entered a new stage. More and more strange phenomena showed that the change of the era was approaching, and it was not like what many people thought, invisible and untouchable, as if it was still very far away. Qing Xian and the others also began to leave. There was no way to watch. The more they watched, the more stifled they felt. The disgusting people who had failed once thought that they were lifting others up high, but in reality, they were being lifted up by others. When they pulled out the ladder, they realized that they had already lifted others up to the clouds, and could no longer fall down. Smoke Puppet pondered. Is this good? Ean Spirit First Severance, Primordial Spirit Second Severance? Our cultivation philosophy has always told us that we shouldn't have too many opportunities in key positions. Once is enough. If you overdo it, the wound will grow. When you treat all of this as normal, it will be the moment when everything collapses. Little E seems to have said something. What was it again? Qing Xian continued, if you walk too fast, you'll pull your balls. The others laughed. Shiyu explained, this sentence actually means that Qian Xiu can't walk too fast, but Kun Xiu can. Qing Xian glared at them and admitted, we didn't do a good job in this matter, it's all my fault. He thinks he's infallible, thinking that he can control people in the palm of his hand. In fact, this guy knows everything and is just playing dumb with us. But I still have to say that in the short term, we are the losers. But in the long term, that might not be the case. Shiyu agreed, senior brother is right. The first slash of the Yin soul did not have much of an impact on a cultivator's cultivation. One could still advance bravely before the end of the epoch. There was no need to deliberately control it. However, a second severance primordial divinity transformation was a problem. Then, how will you control the direction of your cultivation from now on? You won't be able to advance bravely anymore. Because if you advance too fast or if another opportunity comes, when you can take the third step, you will find that you are still a primordial spirit and your foundation is not solid. When the opportunity comes, you can't reject it. Otherwise, it will never come again. The situation of the universe determines that every cultivator has to follow the general trend. You can't look left and right and deliberately stop. You can't stop, but you're afraid of rushing too fast. The process of controlling it is very weak because you can't change the course of the universe. The only way is to reach the On Spirit as soon as possible. But is it so easy to reach the On Spirit? It's different from stepping into an epiphany. It takes time. So I think that our raising may not be ineffective. It's just that this effect may come very slowly. In the beginning, it may even help the enemy. But it doesn't matter. It's better to look at things in the long term. This was a penetrating insight. It originated from the foundation of the orthodox Taoist forces. It explained a principle. Even in such a fast cultivation speed, rhythm was a crucial part. Chaos was relative. Yin spirit, primordial spirit, and Yang spirit, 1 step, 2 steps, and 3 steps could be interspersed, but it couldn't deny its basic rules. Otherwise, it would be very easy to go astray. If too much time was wasted on breaking through to the Yang spirit, you might lose the time to step into an epiphany. Too fast a step, and a weak foundation would definitely affect the last step of a mortal ascension. Qing Xian and the others raising high affected the rhythm of the bamboo hat. Under completely unexpected circumstances, they raised him to the second severance. Qing Xian said calmly, don't be anxious. Our raising high hasn't ended yet. We've only raised it halfway, so how did it fail? Everyone, put in more effort and try to raise him to the third severance as soon as possible. I've always been very curious. If a primordial spirit reached the third severance, what kind of new thing would he come up with? Everyone laughed, and only Yan Xian was unhappy. why do you have to play tricks? If you don't like it, why don't you just fight it out? North Wind spoke the truth. Let's see who's the real deal. That's senior brother Lou's business. As for us, it's more fun to raise each other. This was the rule of the cultivation world. In terms of cause and effect, this was Lu Xiaoyi's own matter. It was not suitable for others to stand up for him. Furthermore, how many people here dared to say that they could deal with a second Severance half-immortal? If he did not find a chance to deal with them, they would be considered merciful. From afar, they saw the marching monk and a few other monks walking together, and everyone nodded in greeting. The marching monk put on a fake smile. Congratulations, freak of Taoism, another genius has appeared. Qing Xian put on a fake smile. Congratulations to you too. Without Grandmaster's support, how could he have such a chance? Both sides brushed past each other, each disdainful. This was the current situation of the interior heaven. Qing Xian looked at his friends. I've been cultivating in the interior heaven for 200 to 300 years now. After a long period of silence, I think it's time to go down and take a look. There's no need to say goodbye. The universe is turbulent, and we'll meet sooner or later. I hope that at that time, we'll have the chance to walk together. Everyone silently returned the greeting. In truth, everyone knew that the change of the 5 Splendors celestial mountains was a shock to everyone. It meant that the change was accelerating. They would no longer use the calculation method of one Tao collapsing every few hundred years to estimate the time of the change of epochs. With the collective collapse of the 5 cosmoses, the collapse of the Great Tao would most likely follow closely behind. There was not much time left. Qing Xian had noticed, and went down to find his own fated chance. Whether it was Yang God or Second Severance, it was all a response to the change. They were the same. Their situations were different, but their goal was the same. Just like Lu Xiaoyi, who did not know the interior heaven at all. Had he already predicted this kind of change? Chapter 1981. Lu Xiaoyi wandered in the space of the small Sumer realm, as if he had really become a monk. In these 100 years, it had played a crucial role in his growth in the Buddhist Tao realm. He did not care about the path of others, but he knew his own path very well. He had his own sources of information about the bamboo hat and the Wuhua celestial mountain in the interior realm. After hearing about it, he just laughed. Qing Xian and the others had gone too far, but everything was not settled yet. It was too early to talk about success or failure. Everyone's path was very special. He never envied others, and he did not regret if he was in the interior realm. That position was actually his. Just like what Yanchen said, what was there to fight for in the Tao state of an immortal who was first eliminated by the heavenly Tao? He did not underestimate himself. That was his pride. It was also the goal he set for himself. All the masters of the immortals in the interior realm were man-immortals and true immortals. There was not even a single golden immortal. He could not give up his own path for these ordinary immortals. To him, staying in the small Sumer realm was obviously more important. Never underestimate others, and never underestimate yourself. This was his belief. For these great Buddhas who might never have the chance to take a step forward, they might be lacking in epiphany, but their deep accumulation in the Tao state of Buddhism was incomparable to any other Buddhist world in the universe. Not only was it profound, but it was also broad and inclusive. Here, he could find any senior monk in the Tao state, without missing out. The issue of a swordsman having an academic exchange in a sacred place of Buddhism was not like what the ordinary people imagined. They were like water and fire, incompatible with each other. This was related to the level of the realm. The so-called exchange between different orthodoxies in the middle and lower realms was laughable. They were still immersed in the path of techniques and were far from Tao. But it was different when they reached the Yuanying level. They had the foundation to discuss Tao. However, it was the right of a half-immortal to go to a different realm and enter Buddhism alone. They had already broken through the shackles of the cultivation world of the main world and could discuss Tao as friends. They were no longer bound by the traditional rules and regulations. They were the highest level of cultivators that the cultivators of the origin world could come into contact with. Any higher and the immortals would not come down to discuss the Tao with you. Therefore, this was actually a two-way exchange. Lu Xiaoyi could get what he wanted in the Buddhist Tao realm, but the great Buddhas of the origin world also had the opportunity to come into contact with the thoughts of a half-immortal. Just like how half-immortals long to see immortals ascend to immortality, the great Buddhas also longed to communicate with half-immortals. Under such a premise, both sides were in different celestial spheres, and there was no direct threat of competition. The entire process of communication became natural, and there was little to hide. Lu Xiaoyi had also solidified the foundations of several Buddhist Tao realms in the past 100 years. He was only waiting for the shard of Tao to make the final upgrade. Not only did he come into contact with the Tao state of Buddhism, but he also came into contact with the life of Buddhism. This was determined by his unique philosophy. If you want to see all the 36 great Taos, you can't treat Buddhism as your enemy. Perhaps he could go against a certain monk or a certain Buddhist sect, but he could not go against the entire Buddhist sect. It was just like how he belonged to the Taoist sect, but he had killed many Taoists. He had to maintain a balance. The Taoist sect was the main sect, but the Buddhist sect was also indispensable. Now that he had completed the exchange of Tao realms in the small Sumra realm, he could leave. Hands-free had gone to the interior heaven and would not be back for some time. He needed to bid farewell to these Buddhas. They might not be friends, but they could be called true Taoists. There was no need to draw a clear line between the great Tao and the primordial Tao. Only when you understood this would you have the breadth of mind to reach a higher level. Monk 9 Annihilation had a fat head and big ears. He looked like a Maitreya Buddha. Lord Lu, you have been preaching in the small Sumru realm for the past 100 years. You have broadened our horizons, and we have learned a lot. Now that we are parting, I can't believe you are reluctant to part. As a Taoist, you are the first person to make the small Sumru realm feel this way. Lu Xiaoyi was very polite. The small Sumru realm is indeed a Buddhist sacred world. I admire its open-minded attitude. Learning is mutual, how can there be such a thing as who teaches who? But the 100 years in the small Sumru realm was the most peaceful time of my cultivation experience. As a swordsman, it is really surprising that there is such a peaceful environment in the Buddhist world. Monk 9 Annihilation laughed. It depends on the person. Not everyone can receive the same treatment as Lord Lu. What he said was right. Academic exchanges also had to be of equal value. If a Taoist who was proficient in the Taoist Tao realm came here, there wouldn't be much meaning in the exchange. You talked about virtues, I talked about the 5 elements, you talked about nirvana, I talked about slaughter, you talked about nirvana, I talked about thunder. It was like a chicken talking to a duck. Perhaps both sides would gain something, but they definitely wouldn't go too deep. This was because these were different great Tao systems, and there was no way to compare them. Lu Xiaoyi was different. He had his own direction of study in the Buddhist Tao realm. He had his own path of study in the Buddhist Tao realm. He had a deep understanding of karma, samsara, impermanence, and the other Buddhist Tao realms. Thus, he had the possibility of further study. And it was precisely because he was proficient in the Buddhist Tao realm that many great Buddhas were proficient in. This caused the monks of the small Sumru realm to feel as if they were on the same path as him. You said that you had good intentions towards Buddhism, but why? How could they believe you? But if you were proficient in several Buddhist great Taos, then there was no need to say anything. The monks would naturally treat you as one of their own. The great Tao wouldn't lie. Once such a person ascended to a high position, his attitude towards Buddhism would definitely not be biased. Considering that the sword vein was also a Tao tradition that was suppressed and ostracized by the Taoist sect, very few people in the small Sumru realm hid anything from him. This was a happy and honest exchange experience. This junior will remember this trip to the small Sumru realm. If there is a chance in the future, perhaps there will be a chance for our two sects to work together. 9 Annihilation side. In the main world, this is all. Lord Lu, you have been here for 100 years. You should know that the small Sumeru realm's attitude towards the cultivation world is different from that of the great sage heavens. We have the same ideals and are in different celestial spheres. There won't be many chances for us to cross paths in the future. This old monk only hopes that when Lord Lu soars to the heavens in the future, you won't forget this experience in the small Sumeru realm. The Taoists and Buddhists are not all impenetrable walls. Living together is eternal. Fighting is venting. Once everyone is done venting, we will still have to live together. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. This old monk was very insightful. He was also very precise about his own position. He did not ask for anything in return. He just wanted to form good karma. In the changing of eras, this kind of good karma was more important than anything else. This was not a paradise. There were all kinds of troubles. The reason why he did not ask for help was because he wanted to use this favor at the most critical moment. This was a true virtuous senior monk. Not just for the small Sumeru realm, but for the entire Buddhist sect. But did he think too highly of Lu Xiaoyi? Chapter 1982. This was 100 years without any aftereffects. There were no battles, no troubles, and no promises. He came and went quietly, very much like a cultivator. The small Sumeru realm was a relatively pure Buddhist holy land. It was the mainstream ideology of the Buddhist sects in the current cultivation world. To be fair, the existence of such a orthodoxy was beneficial to the flourishing of the cultivation world. This was also the reason why he never extended his opinion of a certain monk or temple to the entire orthodoxy. However, the small Sumeru realm had nothing to ask of him, but there were places that needed his help. Otherwise, he might have stayed in the small Sumeru realm for a while. The Heavenly Eyes sent an order. Lu Xiaoyi wore a bamboo hat as a member of the Heavenly Eyes and entered the Yellow Springs Road to kill the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron. The Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron was one of the Hoodoo 8 cauldrons. The Hoodoo 8 cauldrons were a set of cauldron-shaped innate spiritual treasures. Some of them had independent consciousness, while some had yet to awaken. Those with independent consciousness all had their own achievements, but those without independent consciousness could only be reduced to tools for humans. Of course, such a famous treasure was not in the hands of the cultivators of the current cultivation world. It had long been collected by people in the ancient times, and its whereabouts were unknown. This Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron was collected by a cultivator. Later on, this cultivator became an immortal with it. He was immortal Wuhua. His so-called Great Way of Leap Earth was actually taken from this cauldron. His so-called ancient method was actually the method of refining cauldrons. The so-called triple quenching of the furnace that was spread later was just an excuse to deceive others. It was no wonder that it could not be passed down and became unpopular. He couldn't pass it down because there was no second Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron. Immortal Wuhua became an immortal with the help of an innate spiritual treasure. It seemed a little unbelievable now, but in that era, there were all kinds of strange ways to become an immortal. There was no such thing as authentic or not. This was also the reason why the heavenly Tao was not perfect at that time. Exactly how immortal Wuhua used the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron was a cultivator's secret. It was not necessary to tell outsiders. However, it was also because he relied on external objects that when the great Tao began to collapse, immortal man-immortals like him were the most dangerous group. This made Lu Xiaoyi understand a principle. In fact, the first immortals to fall might not be the worst in the immortal court, but their foundation in the Tao realm was definitely the worst. Once the great Tao of the golden immortals collapsed, it was time for those of them whose foundation was not solid and who did not purely rely on their own comprehension to ascend to the immortal court. More than 10 years ago, the scene of the Wuhua Celestial Mountain in the interior realm meant that the old immortal had passed away. However, the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron that he borrowed from the ancient times did not follow him. Instead, it gave birth to its own spiritual consciousness when the old immortal had passed away. To the immortal elder, it was a disaster, but to Tian Ding, it was a rebirth. Death and life were the mysteries of cultivation. This was a general introduction to the heaven's eyes. It was something that had to be explained clearly in every mission. It would help the cultivators better judge the progress of the mission. But something must have gone wrong in the process. The heaven's eyes did not explain in detail, but Lu Xiaoyi's guess was that the birth of the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron's spiritual consciousness was strange. Perhaps it was immortal Elder Wu Hua's escape plan, the complete transfer of his consciousness, or a partial concealment of his consciousness. To put it simply, the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron's consciousness was not pure. It was contaminated and did not completely belong to him. In the foreseeable future, there was a high probability that the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron would be completely controlled by human consciousness again. How could a wild independent consciousness fight against a scheming old soul that had lived for countless years? According to the rules of the Immortal Court, this kind of borrowing technique by immortals was intolerable. It would cause great harm to the order of immortal cultivation, block the path of the lower realm's advancement, and cause chaos to the immortal world. If everyone did this, wouldn't the Immortal Court be in chaos? As immortals, who didn't have a few tricks up their sleeves, such as substituting the plum for the peach tree? Opening a hole would cause no end of trouble. Immortal Elder Wu Hua was knowingly breaking the law. He was greedy for luck. He placed his hopes on the ancient innate Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron, thinking that he could deceive the world and escape. Little did he know that although his lifespan was long, there were many existences in the Immortal Court that were older than him. No matter how cleverly he hid the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron and did not show it in front of people for millions of years, he still couldn't escape the attention of people. What's more, this was blasphemy to the numinous treasure race. The task given by the Immortal Court this time was chosen by the numinous treasure sovereign of the Heaven's Eyes. It chose two people, Bamboo Hat and Lu Xiaoyi. It didn't choose a Buddhist half-immortal because immortal Elder Wu Hua was the foundation of the Tao vein. In line with the principle of meat in the pot, dirty linen in the family, it could only be completed by a Taoist half-immortal. It chose Bamboo Hat because he had karma with immortal Elder Wu Hua. If you get benefits, you naturally have to contribute. Otherwise, you will take all the benefits and throw the mess to others. How could there be such a good thing in the world? It chose Lu Xiaoyi for unknown reasons. But then the Heaven's Eyes sent him a private message: the innate numinous treasure race will never allow the human consciousness to take over their nest. Identify the origin of the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron's consciousness and expel it from the human consciousness. Even if the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron returns to the chaos, it will not hesitate. In extreme cases, it can even destroy the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron. This time, Bamboo Hat was the main target because he had karma. If he has any other thoughts, he will be killed. Below, there was a vague picture of a pagoda. Lu Xiaoyi curled his lips. Lord Linglong? Sovereign? You really think highly of me? The situation was already very clear. Lord Linglong found two people to carry out the task. One was the main target and was also a cover. The other was a supplement and was given the power to make arbitrary decisions. If necessary, he could even kill Lord Linglong. He was very frank and was very clear about his likes and dislikes. Lu Xiaoyi saw very clearly that Lord Linglong was very clear about the dispute between him and Bamboo Hat. This also indirectly showed that Bamboo Hat's targeting of Lu Xiaoyi was not completely out of personal motives, but also the intentions of other celestial lords. The two of them both wanted the 36 innate Great Tao. This was a natural mutual incompatibility, and with the instigation of other celestial lords, he was very curious. As the four celestial lords of the Heaven's Eyes, was it really okay for two of them to target each other so openly? The Bamboo Hat man was very concerned about him, but he was just the opposite. He had never taken this proud son of heaven to heart, nor had he deliberately looked for trouble with him. Of course, he couldn't find him either, because this guy had always been avoiding him. Missions from the Heaven's Eyes could be rejected. Bamboo Hat did not reject this time, which meant that he had confidence in himself. The experience of the second severance more than a dozen years ago gave him enough confidence in his heart. Let's see what kind of quality he was. Lu Xiaoyi was still not too concerned. He was someone who knew his priorities, and knew that the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron was the most important target. Against an opponent like Bamboo Hat, he had long since lost that urge to kill him as soon as possible. That was because he understood more and more that in this cultivation world, there were many things that could not be solved by killing. He was enjoying this process. As for killing, it was only a convenient thing to do in the process of enjoyment, and to adjust his cultivation. Chapter 1983. Where was the road to the underworld? Everyone had different opinions. Lu Xiaoyi's attitude was that he would know what he needed to know and what he shouldn't. Just like the Odd Righteous Pure Land, if he didn't go there, how would he know that every cultivator had their own Odd Righteous Pure Land? Just like now, when it was time for him to use it, he would know. But it messed up his rhythm. He was supposed to go to the road of no return, the Phoenix Perch Nest. He couldn't help it. A beam of light appeared in the void. It was the transmission channel of the heavenly eye, the power of an immortal. Clearly, the road to the underworld this time was a real path, not an illusion like the one in the Odd Righteous Pure Land. Lord Lingwang was a little anxious. Since it involved an innate spiritual treasure, it probably wasn't an ordinary one either. Lu Xiaoyi was a little curious, but he knew that his curiosity was inappropriate. Flying into the light beam channel was like entering a strange space-time tunnel. He had a deep understanding of space-time, but he couldn't fully understand its mysteries. But from his point of view, he couldn't break open this space-time tunnel with his current ability. It wasn't only because of his lack of knowledge, but also because of his cultivation. He couldn't see any other cultivators around him. This was determined by the nature of the space-time tunnel. Even if two people entered at the same time and from the same position, they wouldn't see each other. Of course, he had no companions this time. When Lu Xiaoyi appeared on the other side of the light beam channel, he found that he was not alone. There were a few half-immortal cultivators scattered in the distance. Looking further, there were many more. There were dozens of cultivators within the range of his perception sense and hundreds of cultivators within the range of his divine sense. There should be some outside the range of his perception sense. He was familiar with these people. Some of them were in the interior realm and some were in the exterior realm. He quickly realized the strangeness of this mission. It didn't seem like it was just him and the Bamboo Hat. It was more like a big battlefield. Lu Xiaoyi's reaction was very fast. Was there any place in the universe that required the inner and outer scenic skies to work together? There was only one, the wall of reflection. The road to the underworld was the wall of reflection, and the wall of reflection was the road to the underworld. It was the same thing, just different names. It was all because of those people who liked to play with the names to make up the numbers. Beside these Blight Realm cultivators, there were many shadows. In the deep space, there was no place for shadows to withstand, so these shadows were actually mirror images of the Blight Realm cultivators. One person and one shadow looked like they were dancing, but they were actually fighting for their lives and were abnormally fierce. The mirror images outside were just the other selves of those cultivators who had died in the deteriorating state. They were a kind of obsession, and their strength would never surpass the original. Therefore, most of the cultivators of the exterior realm, except for those who were really not good at fighting, could still be killed. However, the energy bodies of resentment inside were different. They were not the mirror images of ancient cultivators, but monsters formed by the resentment of countless cultivators. They might be able to cast spells or recite Buddhist scriptures. They might even be able to form a flying sword. Their unpredictability was their greatest characteristic. The wall of mirrors wasn't a physical barrier. Instead, it was a mental barrier that was supported by countless thoughts. After millions of years, cultivators of the Blight realm had appeared. Until now, how many cultivators of the Blight realm had thrown their thoughts here? Judging from the tens of thousands of Blight realm cultivators of the exterior realm, there were at least millions of them. It was very likely that there were millions of them. With so many cultivators' thoughts mixed together, entangling with each other and fermenting, what kind of spiritual barrier would be formed? Just thinking about it was terrifying. It was no wonder that even immortals would turn pale at the mention of it. This was the graveyard of the Blight realm cultivators after their deaths. It wasn't their bodies that were buried, but all kinds of thoughts, resentment, and obsessions. They lingered here for a long time, so it didn't seem wrong to call it the road to the underworld. The mission of the half-immortals of the interior and exterior realm for tens of thousands of years was to eliminate, or rather, suppress the madness of these spiritual bodies. As the signs of the universe's changes became more and more obvious, the spiritual bodies of resentment here became more and more restless. They were a source of disaster that could explode at any time. If these resentment escaped to the universe and took over, it would bring about disastrous consequences to the universe's cultivation world. The half-immortals of the interior realm had to come here to carry out their mission once every few hundred years. Lu Xiaoyi hadn't had his turn yet, but it was probably a matter of time. Now, he could only treat it as coming here to familiarize himself with the environment. The Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron came to this kind of place. It thought that this place could hide its unique thoughts and spirits, but under the attention of the immortal court, deity Wu Hua's methods were still not clever enough. The bamboo hat and Lu Xiaoyi's mission was to enter the wall of mirrors and find the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron. Then, according to the specific situation, they would make a judgment whether to wipe out the spiritual consciousness or directly destroy the cauldron body. They weren't in a hurry to go in, but they observed from the outside, but it was difficult to find familiar faces. These cultivators had persevered here for hundreds of years, even before he was qualified to enter the interior realm. It could be said that they didn't know him at all. He didn't need to be too cautious. As a half-immortal, some things could be understood at a glance. Moreover, he wasn't completely ignorant about the wall of mirrors. After entering the interior realm, he still had some understanding of the two most crucial methods of activity. He didn't need to wait for the bamboo hat, just like how the bamboo hat wouldn't wait for him if he came. Whoever found it would be the one to take it. One person could act more freely, but when two people really met, he was afraid that they would guard against each other more than against the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron. Outside the wall of mirrors, there were a few big stars, but they were bare and had nothing. Thus, he didn't have any thoughts and directly cast his gaze toward the wall of mirrors. When Lu Xiaoyi passed through this thin layer of spiritual barrier, even with his firm sword heart, he couldn't help but feel a trace of wavering in his heart. However, a spirit with a carrier and an illusory spirit body couldn't be compared at all, so he passed through. When he entered the other side of the wall of mirrors, the pressure on his spirit disappeared. What followed was the leakage of energy from his body that was everywhere. It was as if there was a huge vacuum pump in the unseen world, sucking in anything with energy from his body. Mana, spirit, chi essence, even willpower, and Tao heart. It was as if all the pores on his body had automatically opened up. He tried all the self-sealing essence gates, dharma walls, and divine orifices that he had learned before, but he still couldn't stop this kind of leakage. This was a normal phenomenon. Even a man immortal couldn't resist the leakage, so it was normal that he couldn't do it. Some items, such as the great medicine and tonic pills, couldn't be taken out of the storage ring. Once they were seen in this universe space, they would immediately lose their medicinal efficacy. Some Taoist and celestial items couldn't stay here for long and their spirituality would be greatly damaged. This kind of situation was very troublesome for those cultivators who relied on great medicine and items to fight. Fortunately, the speed at which a cultivator's body leaked out was acceptable. According to his estimation, if he sat here without moving and didn't consider the consumption of his energy in battle, his vast and pure reserves of essence, energy, and soul could last for at least 10 years before reaching the dangerous red line below 50%. Chapter 1984. Lu Xiaoyi began to adapt to the environment here. He soon discovered that the interior heaven half-immortals entered the space behind the mirror to search for resentful spirits and destroy them. They retreated when they could not hold on any longer and rested outside the wall of the mirror to replenish their essence, qi, and spirit before entering again. They would wait until the 360-year period was up before changing to the next batch. Lu Xiaoyi looked back first. No matter where he went, his timid first reaction would be to figure out the way back instead of blindly rushing forward. What made him feel relieved was that the wall of the mirror was just one of the many celestial phenomena in the universe. It was inconspicuous and difficult to distinguish. However, once he entered the wall of the mirror and looked around with his divine sense, everything would be illusory. He would not even be able to find a fist-sized meteorite, let alone other celestial phenomena. Everything would be inexplicably devoured by this space. Here, he could only see one celestial phenomenon, an abnormal fluctuation, and a bright color. That was the wall of the mirror. Therefore, it seemed that he did not have to worry about not being able to find the way back. This was just entering the wall of the mirror. What if he went deeper? Would it be so easy? According to Lu Xiaoyi's habit of being cautious, the more obvious the path was, the more dangerous it was. If someone could create a lighthouse-like thing in this space, it would put the cultivator in an unknown danger. If this lighthouse-like thing was placed in a dead end and the cultivator ran in the wrong direction, more than half of his energy would be extracted after 10 years. What would that mean? This was a typical late-stage conspiracy theory, but this was the basic quality of a cultivator. You had to think of the worst-case scenario. After tens of thousands of years, it wasn't as if there hadn't been cultivators in the inner and western scenic skies who couldn't find their way back because they went too deep. Of course, there were also man-made disasters, but that was another matter. Inside the wall of the mirror, there were relatively fewer resentful spirits at the space barrier. This was the result of long-term persistence over tens of thousands of years. Only by going deeper could one encounter these spirits. The deeper one went, the more they would encounter them. In such a vast and infinite space, the mere 50 interior cultivators and hundreds of exterior cultivators were like streams flowing into the sea. They could not even cause a ripple. Relatively speaking, the ancient and weak cultivators were not very attractive. Or rather, they were not attractive at all. Which of the existences who left their immortal thoughts here did not have the body of a half-immortal? Only the immortals, when they came to this space, were like bright lights in the wilderness that attracted countless insects and moths. They were also like rotten meat that attracted Tautai beasts. This was because these resentful spirits were reluctant and persistent in becoming immortals. This was the reason why the immortals were not willing to come down to solve this problem. Of course, it was also because they wanted to find something for these idle half-immortals to do. Those who were tasked here were all half-immortals who had taken the first or second step. They knew how to balance their actions. They would not be impulsive and disregard themselves for the happiness of all humans. They would not be sneaky and not put in effort. The principle was to do their best within the scope of their abilities. This was the basic understanding and attitude of every cultivator who came here. Lu Xiaoyi's goal was not to destroy the resentful spirits. He was here to find the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron, so he did not need to consider how to destroy them. But where was the Heaven Cauldron? If it was hidden very deep, it meant that he would be taking a higher risk than ordinary people. There were so many interior and exterior half-immortals here. He did not believe that there were no heavenite cultivators among them. Wouldn't it be better to find a group nearby to do it? Why did he have to take off his pants and fart? He had to find two enemies. This was the rule of immortals. They were more inclined to deal with the messy and so-called far-reaching matters behind the matter rather than the matter as it was. The first thing he had to do was to determine his position. But his current position was much easier than those seniors of his. Tens of thousands of years ago, among the first batch of interior and exterior half-immortals who entered here, there was the Crow ancestor. At that time, they could be said to be surrounded by danger and had nothing to rely on. But after tens of thousands of years, generations of cultivators set up countless beacon towers in the wall of mirrors for their own safety. Slowly, a system was formed, and it was quite large. As long as you didn't go too far, you didn't have to worry about not being able to find your way back. After understanding this, he began to prepare to come into contact with those resentful spirits. Although there were countless seniors who had left behind countless experiences to fight with them over the past tens of thousands of years, it was still shallow to read on paper. He had to put it into practice. In principle, even the weakest half-immortals could deal with a few of them at the same time. As long as you did not pull too many of them and seek death. Under the guidance of this thought, Lu Xiaoyi began to fly inside and took the initiative to provoke these hateful and pitiful spirits. Actually, they were all pitiful people. Since there had been cultivation in the universe, too many cultivators had fallen at the last step of becoming a celestial. Their most common characteristic was that they would never give up on becoming a celestial. Whether it was those who were only a step away from the second severance or those who were still a step away from the first severance, their feelings were all the same. Becoming a celestial was to sever one's obsession. If one could not sever it, this kind of obsession would not disappear even after death. With no place to put it, it was captured and brought to the reflecting mirror wall, causing them to only become a kind of resentful spirit after losing their self-awareness. They retained all their obsession and part of their abilities, but completely forgot that they had once been human. They were a kind of pure spirit energy body with the goal of becoming a celestial. This kind of spirit energy body began to change in a dangerous direction after accumulating for several million years. This was also an inevitable law of nature, just like how methane would be produced after being piled up in a cesspool for a long time. And now, it had caught up with the changes of heaven and earth. These spirit energy bodies all had different personalities. There were cowardly ones, and there were also brave ones. Of course, there were also those that were cunning. Destroying them was not a problem, but the problem was how to do it in the most time, effort, and origin energy. He had to think of a more difficult problem. If he wanted to complete his mission under the siege of countless resentful spirit energy bodies, he would need to have a deep tactical understanding of these things. With a flash, flying swords filled the sky, surrounding the resentful spirit energy body in the middle, forming a tornado of flying swords. Through continuously changing Tao realms, he was testing what this thing was most wary of. Absolute void was useless, the five elements were useless, and yin and yang were useless. Slaughter, destruction, lightning, five ties, impermanence, space, and so on, the Tao realms that Lu Xiaoyi was proficient in were completely useless against this thing. Thus, he tried various sword techniques. Controlling the sword was definitely meaningless against a spirit body, and it was the same for killing swords. He focused on the Tao sword system that the Crow ancestor had created, which was the more obscure and strange sword techniques that originated from the Western Zhao sword technique system. Chapter 1985. The main target of Lu Xiaoyi's swordsmanship system was human beings, demonic beasts, and all living things with physical bodies. It was not just a bunch of random thoughts. In fact, for something like this, if he used the celestial swordsmanship created by the Crow ancestor to deal with it, the large-scale destructive energy impact should be effective. However, doing so would consume too much mana. Moreover, he had not learned the celestial swordsmanship yet. After he took the first step, he had his own understanding of swordsmanship. He did not have to follow the Crow ancestor's old path. The Crow ancestor created the astronomical swordsmanship because his understanding of the Tao was limited. His specialty was that he had mastered all 36 Taos. Of course, different specialties would lead to different directions of swordsmanship. The vengeful spirit's counterattack was just as ferocious. In a short period of time, the vengeful spirit had used several different methods of attack. There were the Dharma images of body cultivators, the spiritual attacks of soul cultivators, and the forbidden arts of Taoism. These attacks were unleashed by the spirit body without the slightest hesitation. However, the problem was that it was not a spirit body with a complete soul. It had no plans or traps. In short, its attacks did not have a soul. In a battle like Lu Xiaoyi's, the effect it could achieve was very limited. The method was quickly found. The sword of light, the burning of ashes, the reversion of fate, the conversion of merit, and so on. With a start, the next step was a matter of course. This was how swordsmanship worked. Once you understood how to destroy the essence of these things, you would be able to find many ways to deal with them. This was especially true for swordsmen like Lu Xiaoyi, who had a wide range of swordsmanship and was an expert in swordsmanship. After he found the method, he began to test the rate of depletion of his elemental energy. For example, the rate of depletion of his elemental energy, the rate of depletion of his elemental energy in battle, the rate of depletion of his elemental energy when he remained still, and so on. Finally, he gathered a group of more than 10 vengeful spirits and killed them together. After observing the rate of depletion of his elemental energy, he was finally able to estimate how long he could stay here. Not bad. He estimated that he could stay here for 7 to 8 years. After that, he would have to return to prevent his elemental energy from being depleted. He also had to take into account the possibility of encountering human cultivators with ill intentions. After he was ready, Lu Xiaoyi floated in the void and formed a breath. This breath was given to him by the Heavenly Eyes Lord when he was sent here. It could be used to find innate spiritual treasures and identify their traces. The aura floated up like a white rainbow. It shot straight up, then split into 3 branches and floated in 3 different directions. Upon seeing this, Lu Xiaoyi could not help but want to complain. 3 branches, how was he supposed to find them? The numinous treasure lord had the responsibility to control the innate and acquired numinous treasures of the primary world, but there was a difference. The numinous treasures of the Heavenly Eye system had their every move under the Lord's watch. This was even more perverse than the human immortal monarch's control over their subordinates. It wasn't that the numinous treasure lord was stronger, but that there were simply too many human cultivators and too few numinous treasures. But for the Heavenly Eye's system of Heavenly Lord's control was limited. He could not know all of them like the back of his hand, especially those that had just gained sentience. The Leap 8 Heaven's Cauldron was within this range. Therefore, the Heavenly Lord's guidance could only provide the direction of 3 innate spiritual treasures. There were 3 innate spiritual treasures in the mirror image wall. As for which one was which, he had to find it himself. Very unreliable. If the bamboo hat was here, he should have sensed it first. Because he had a mysterious connection with immortal Wu Hua when he was in the interior realm. How should he choose? Lu Xiaoyi stared at the 3 forks of white smoke for a long time, but it was all in vain. He couldn't see anything. He did not know much about innate spiritual treasures. He had never owned such a big thing. He could only make a judgment based on the direction. He put the direction that led directly to the depths of the mirror last and chose the direction towards the edge. This was a consideration of his mentality. Of the 3 directions, 2 were easy and 1 was deep. The deepest was most likely to be the location of the innate spiritual treasures. So, what would you choose? Many people would choose to go deeper into the forest because it was common knowledge that those who were fleeing would definitely go deeper into the forest. But the problem was that when you went deeper and deeper in this direction but still could not find the target, you would inevitably doubt yourself. Is it in this direction? Will the other party do the opposite? And so on. You would question your own thoughts. In the end, you would become less confident and hesitant when going deeper. The correct way was to first settle the 2 easy directions. After confirming that it was not the Leap 8 Heaven's Cauldron, he would focus on the 3rd direction. It might take more time, but the goal was clear and the direction was firm. He did not care too much about who completed this task. If he could complete it without exerting himself, why not? With this train of thought, his mentality was very relaxed. He only went along the edge and increased his speed to the maximum. He was like a stream of light all the way. He had been searching for him for an entire year. Ding Shan had been loitering in the vicinity for a very long time. As an exterior half-immortal, it could be said that he was not working hard in the wall of mirrors. 100 years had passed and the deadline to return was approaching. He was ready to start the plan that he had been preparing for 100 years. He was a third decay half-immortal. In the exterior realm, his ability could be considered outstanding. His orthodoxy was also a branch of Taoism. He could be considered a half-immortal with a relatively bright future. The cultivators of the main world always felt that these half-immortals were superior and looked down on all living things. They did not know that in the exterior realm, the suffering of half-immortals was also incomprehensible. Becoming an immortal was a wish, but the cruel reality was. There were 10,000 half-immortals in the exterior realm. They only had a chance to become an immortal once in tens of thousands of years. There were many fourth decay and fifth decay half-immortals waiting anxiously. There were many demons below. The cultivators of the lower world could not understand their anxiety. If he did not take the risk, he would forever become a spectator. The change of the era would have nothing to do with him. Here, in the wall of mirrors, these pitiful and hateful resentful spirits were his final destination. No one was willing to be like this. In the past 1,000 years, the number of exterior half-immortals dying was much higher than in history. Moreover, this trend was still worsening. It was not because of the abnormal environment, but because more and more half-immortals were adopting more radical methods in the process of cultivation. There were those who complied with the law, those who were not, those who were struggling on their deathbed, and those who were staking everything on one throw. Everyone was frantically testing the waters at the edge of success and failure. Just for this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity like the change of the era. Why must the opportunity belong to the fourth decay and fifth decay? On what basis should those so-called up-and-coming talents occupy the leading position? Just because they were reincarnated at the right time? In fact, the overflowing of the heart plate was a reflection of this mentality. It could not be controlled. The great change was coming. Everyone had a chance to fight the waves. If they did not fight now, when would they? Chapter 1986. Ding Shan was also gambling, but everyone's gambling method was different. He was from the equipment refining sect, which was also an orthodox Taoist inheritance, just like the Tao of pills and talismans. To the swordsman's orthodoxy, they were the kind of impure cultivators who relied too much on external objects. However, in their ideology, what was the difference between the equipment refining sect relying on external objects and the swordsman relying on swords? Since he was from the equipment refining sect, it was a test of each cultivator's background. Unfortunately, his orthodoxy was very strong, but his power was far from the resources of the real big powers in the universe. In the eyes of others, he was very rich, but only he knew that his little bit of wealth was not enough in front of the real big powers half-immortals. And the equipment refining sect's reliance on external objects was very important. For example, if he wanted to quickly pass through the third decay, he needed a divine object to help him speed up the process of his primordial spirit's decay. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would not be able to catch up with the change of era before the fifth decay, and would lose this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Divine objects were hard to find in the world. To bear the primordial spirit of a third decay half-immortal, it was not something that ordinary objects could bear. Ding Shan had searched the universe for thousands of years, but he could not find it. This was also fate. He had to admit that compared to the ancient times, it was very difficult to find scraps in the current cultivation world. Everyone had been searching for scraps for millions of years, so how could it be his turn? He could wear out iron shoes to look for something in vain, only to find it by chance. After searching for thousands of years, he could not find a suitable divine object. This time, he had no choice but to participate in the mirror observation mission, and he actually found one, and it was an ownerless object. The empty divine magic conch, an ownerless and innate spiritual treasure. It was just placed in the mirror observation wall, and no one picked it up, and it had been floating there for thousands of years. It was not that no one really wanted it, but it was because it had a special function. The mirror observation wall had a leak, and the inner and outer scenic sky cultivators started to enter and sweep, so the positioning of the mirror observation wall became a big problem. However, in the world of cultivation, there was never a lack of people who were broad-minded and had good karma. Therefore, there were always half-immortals who set up their own beacon towers in unfamiliar airspace to point out the direction for later generations. Even though there were only a handful of such people, the wall of mirrors had formed a perfect system of guidance over the past tens of thousands of years. At the very least, this system was still very complete within a certain distance of the stronghold. But it was a different story if one ventured any deeper. Given enough time, the entire wall of mirrors would be covered by this system one day. Most of the waymark artifacts left behind were ordinary artifacts that would lose their effectiveness over time. Then, someone would replace them with new artifacts. However, there were also some system fulcrum artifacts that were extremely precious. For example, the empty divine magic conch. It was unknown which selfless person had placed it here, but it was used as a supporting waymark node in this large airspace. After tens of thousands of years, it had not moved at all. It was not that no one had ever thought about this innate spiritual treasure, but since it was in the entire waymark system, its existence naturally affected all the half-immortals who came in. Once someone made a move, everyone would know. Under such circumstances, who would end up in a situation where everyone wanted to beat them up? It was precisely because of this that this innate spiritual treasure that did not have any innate spiritual intelligence had been floating here for tens of thousands of years. It was completely embedded in the waymark system. As time passed, it became a big attraction of the mirror observation wall. Many half-immortals would come to look at it after entering and sighing with regret before leaving. Thus, it became a symbol, a lucky spiritual treasure, and received everyone's respect. In this wave of half-immortals, whether it was the interior or exterior immortals, it was almost time for them to return. Therefore, they had already seen what they wanted to see. Up until now, other than Ding Shan who was still wandering around not far away, there were no other cultivators. Ever since he saw this treasure, he wanted to take it for himself. He had no choice. A man's ambition was short when he was poor, and a horse's hair was long when it was thin. He knew that this was wrong, but in order to save himself, he could not care so much. After 100 years of planning and meticulous preparation, the drama of swapping a leopard cat for the crown prince was about to be completed. The plan was very complicated, but also very simple. It was to create an artifact that could temporarily replace the empty divine magic conch. For a refiner like him, it was not easy to achieve this. However, after 100 years of observation, where there was a will, there was a way. He really made such a thing. Whether it was the guidance of the waymark, the fluctuation of the aura, the attribute of the spiritual treasure, or even the appearance, it was enough to pass off as the real thing. But the problem was, of course, it was impossible for him to really create a treasure that was the same as an innate spiritual treasure. He could do this because the empty divine magic conch only used a small part of its abilities in the waymark system. He only needed to simulate this part. His imitation could not withstand close observation, and the time it could use the waymark system was also very limited. Therefore, when to replace it was a very important problem. He set the time to when his mission period was up. At that time, hundreds of people would leave, and no one would suspect the small changes in the waymark system. When the next batch of inner and outer scenic sky cultivators came in, he would have already returned to the exterior scenic sky. When someone found out, the two batches of half-immortals added up to more than 1,000 people, who would interrogate them one by one. It was a flawless plan. Before that, he would secretly replace the fake with the real one. At the same time, he would secretly observe everyone's reaction. If someone came to check, he would replace it with the real one. If no one noticed, then he would continue. There were still a few years left. He was amazed at himself for having such a perfect plan. Just like the situation now, there were two identical empty divine magic conches floating in the void, faithfully carrying out their duties. If it was not intentional, it would be very difficult for anyone to notice that he had really put in all his effort in this imitation. This was also a kind of psychological compensation. After all, he had taken away something that was public, which was very immoral. Ding Shan paced back and forth at the maximum controllable distance from his imitation. He destroyed a few spiritual bodies here and there. This kind of life would still take a few years. It was very boring and dry. He was worried and afraid that some blind and nosy person would come and ruin his good deed. This kind of life was very torturous, but if a person had the motivation to become an immortal, and had the experience of thousands of years of painstakingly searching for treasures, then all of this was not so unbearable. Cultivation was very difficult. What was difficult was not only the body, but more importantly, the soul. The despair in the struggle, the unwillingness in the despair, the madness in the unwillingness. When all of these were mixed together, there was nothing that they did not dare to do. Chapter 1987. The Law of Cultivation. When you are afraid of something, it will definitely come. The two Chis approached quickly. Ding Shan sighed in his heart and quickly put away the fake magic conch. Then, he pulled a resentful spiritual body and pretended to be there. Not everyone was interested in the empty divine magic conch. Some were just passing by and some came to see the innate spiritual treasure. To him, these two cultivators were strangers. It was normal that they didn't know each other in the exterior community. The two came together and didn't pay attention to Ding Shan, who was far away. They just walked around the innate spiritual treasure as if it was their first time seeing it. After observing for a long time, two cultivators flew towards Ding Shan. This made him have a bad premonition in his heart. His method was very clever, but there were many people in the half-immortal community who were more clever than him. He was betting that no one would have any improper thoughts about the empty god magic conch in the next 10,000 years. He didn't think that his method could really deceive everyone here. As expected, one of the unfamiliar half-immortals said, "How should I address you? It is fate that we meet. We are new here and there are some things that we don't understand. Please help us." Ding Shan said politely, "It's okay. We are all exterior masters and should help each other. I am Ding Shan, and I will tell you everything I know." One of the half-immortals said with a smile, "Then, can you tell me why the empty divine magic conch Chis are sometimes strong and sometimes weak? Is it real and sometimes illusory? It was the same before we came, but why is it the same when we get closer?" Ding Shan's heart tightened. The biggest obstacle to his plan was here. If he couldn't get through this obstacle, his hundreds of years of preparation would be in vain. "I don't understand what you are talking about. What do you mean?" The two unfamiliar half-immortals looked at each other and smiled. One of them pointed out the purpose of their visit. "Let's put it this way. Are you really here to kill the spiritual evil or do you have other purposes?" Seeing Ding Shan's vigilant face, the two laughed. "Let's not beat around the bush. You can't hide the fact that you want the empty divine magic conch. We are not here to stop people from cultivating. We just want to get a piece of the pie. I wonder if fellow Taoist Ding can fulfill our wish." Ding Shan's eyes narrowed. "The two of you aren't even willing to tell me your names, yet you want to threaten me?" A half-immortal's voice gradually turned cold. "If we have an agreement, then we will naturally tell you our identities. However, if fellow Taoist Ding doesn't want to cooperate, then I'm afraid it won't be good for you to know our names." Ding Shan knew that it was impossible for this matter to be settled peacefully. Since the other party dared to ask so bluntly, of course, he didn't have any good intentions. There was also nothing to hide. Acting dumb in front of a half-immortal was completely meaningless. Once the cultivation of the vital spirit takes a step forward, it will be no more than a half immortal of the exterior realm. At this moment, he came to the wall of mirrors. If he was not forced by an exterior task, then it could only be that he wanted to avoid trouble. I heard that an exterior expert was punished by an interior expert a few days ago. Don't tell me you're one of the hundreds of exterior evildoers who are wanted. The younger generation will surpass us in time. You can't even take care of yourself, yet you dare to come to the wall of mirrors to threaten your seniors? Both of them were quick-witted people. No one could hide from the other. Ding Shan's intentions were seen through at a glance, but the identities of the two evildoers of the exterior realm were also exposed by him. The two evildoers looked at each other, their hearts surging with murderous intent. They were indeed two of the evildoers of the exterior realm who were involved with the heart plate. After being announced as the targets of the assassination by Lu Tian, they had been somewhat anxious in the main world all day long. This was because they didn't know whether this kind of arrest was limited to the evildoers of the interior realm. Or was it related to the entire interior and exterior realm? If it was the latter, then it would really bring them endless trouble. Another point was, how did the new exterior immortal monarch resolve this matter? These two evildoers were the most agile among this group of people. Through some channels, they got in touch with the grand cultivators of the exterior realm. With the tacit consent of the Jade Booklet, they agreed to use a certain disguised method to obtain the forgiveness of the exterior realm. This method was to go to the wall of mirrors to work to offset their past sins. There was no contract. It was a kind of tacit understanding. That was why they came here. However, for people like them, it was impossible for their ideas and actions to be restrained just because of the punishment of the interior realm. The change of the era was imminent. Everyone was working hard to move forward. They were used to using the method they thought was right. They wouldn't change because of anyone. For the time being, they couldn't touch the heart plate, but there were other methods, such as the famous empty divine magic conch of the wall of mirrors. Under the circumstances, everyone had their own ambitions. This couldn't be considered wrong. You, Lu Tian, had your own path. Should others just sit around and wait for death? Since they had the empty divine magic conch, they immediately found something fishy after careful observation. This was a helpless coincidence. Ding Shan's various methods were to deceive the half-immortals who had stayed in the mirror of mirrors for a long time. He had indeed done it perfectly. However, he didn't expect that the heavens wouldn't listen to his wishes. Out of nowhere, two greenhorns appeared. These two people didn't have the so-called experience. As a result, the experienced veterans were all kept in the dark. Only these two inexperienced people discovered that something was wrong with the treasure at the first moment. When they arrived at the scene and saw Ding Shan, they immediately understood that they had met their peers. Peers always had a tacit understanding of each other. One of the evildoers was very direct. "I'm Thimble Needle. This is Li Fan. Since everyone has said it out loud, we won't beat around the bush. Before we came, we vaguely felt that the aura of the magic conch was uncertain. It was as if there were two magic conches alternating their effects. I think the real thing is here. The other one is fellow Taoist Ding's item, right? The empty divine magic conch shouldn't be taken by force. Otherwise, if it was discovered, no one would be able to escape. However, everyone who saw it has a share. How can we take it for ourselves? Fellow Taoist has indeed exerted his strength. However, the two of us have strong methods. Who should take it and who should give it up? Why don't we establish a Tao contract? The treasure is shared by the three of us. We can take turns using it. Fellow Taoist Ding, do you think it's fair?" Ding Shan's heart was tormented. With his thousands of years of experience, he knew that he couldn't agree to this. It sounded nice that the treasure was shared by the three of them. If you really agreed to it, there would be endless follow-up methods that would make you unable to stop. After all, he was the one who replaced it. The so-called contract was to tie him up with a shackle. The more it was tied up, the tighter it would get. Moreover, it was almost impossible to reach an understanding regarding the time of use. Because he was going to use this treasure to help him pass through the decline of his primordial spirit. This time could easily be over 1,000 years. How could they coordinate? Moreover, there was still. I'm not stealing it. I'm just borrowing it. After I'm done using it, I'll return it. This is my bottom line. As for you guys, I promise not to tell anyone about your whereabouts and purpose. I also won't affect you guys from collecting the treasure. This is my bottom line. Chapter 1988. Both sides parted on bad terms and were destined to have irreconcilable differences. The two evildoers separated. Needless to say, the outcome would be decided by their hands. For half-immortals, their words and actions were carefully considered and would not change easily. This was the so-called persistence of the Tao heart. Moreover, they also had their own methods to take away the empty divine magic conch. Although it might not be as strict as Ding Shan's, it was still worth a try. After all, they were not on the mission list and could escape after the mission. The prerequisite was that they had to kill this guy who did not know how to appreciate favors. He had asked for their names for no reason, but in the end, he still rejected their request for cooperation. Ding Shan sighed in his heart, knowing that a battle to the death was unavoidable. He did not choose to escape. As a half-immortal of tools, there was a certain gap between him and those half-immortals who were good at fighting. But he had his own methods. With a move of his consciousness, he connected with an indigo bead lying in ambush in the distance. That indigo bead immediately exploded, but the power was controlled to a very small degree. It was only an indescribable spiritual wave attack. Following the explosion of this indigo bead, more indigo beads lying in ambush in all directions exploded one by one, almost at the same time. With a flip of his hand, more than 10 half-immortal weapons were thrown into the air. Each of them displayed their power and formed a battlefield space that covered the two half-immortal evildoers. Strike first to gain the upper hand. Even if he was not a battle type, he understood the true meaning of battle. If you are at a disadvantage, you have to go all out. This was also the mainstream battle mode of the cultivation world in the recent 10,000 years. Don't hold back at the beginning and use your momentum first. Thimble Fan smiled and used his own methods to fight back. In the exterior realm, the traditional cultivators of the Blight State did not have the advantage in strength against these evildoers. This was also the characteristic of the Blight State. The body of the first Blight State was not good, the magical power of the second Blight State was the shortcoming, and the third Blight primordial spirit had loopholes. These were all very obvious flaws that could be easily targeted. Only when the cultivators of the Blight State reached the fourth Blight and fifth Blight could they fully display their strength. But Ding Shan was only at the third Blight. The loopholes in his primordial spirit were very obvious. They were confident that they could end this battle in a short time. Those quasi-immortal artifacts looked intimidating, but they were just some half-spiritual objects. Although they weren't completely dead, it was a fact that they lacked spiritual intelligence. When one reached the quasi-immortal realm, one wouldn't care too much about such magical objects. They might be very powerful, but they were too rigid. The battle prowess of the equipment refining sex half-immortals largely depended on whether or not they had a truly top-notch item, such as a natural spiritual treasure. Li Fan used a large area of effect Tao realm to sweep out, instantly attracting the attack power of those quasi-immortal artifacts. On this side, the thimble had already forcibly broken through. For people who played with weapons, what they were most afraid of was the opponent breaking through and entering a short distance. Once the opponent got close, their refining skills would not be able to serve a living person. One pull and one dash, it was extremely ingenious. At the very least, Ding Shan didn't have any means to deal with it. But he still knew his principles, and that was not to run. As long as he ran, with his mediocre escape technique, he would fall into an irreversible situation. Thimble's breakthrough went smoothly, but she immediately felt that something was wrong. This was because around Ding Shan's body, a large number of resentment spirits were coming one after another. What was even more troublesome was that there were even more spirit bodies constantly surging over. Ding Shan hadn't completely placed his hopes on the carelessness of others in the 100 years he had been here. He had also prepared a battle method for himself, not with his quasi-immortal artifacts, but with the resentment spirits that were everywhere in the wall of the reflecting mirror. For 100 years, he had constantly placed indigo pearls in order to lure these things over at critical moments. Spirit bodies couldn't distinguish between friend and foe, they attacked indiscriminately. But Ding Shan could rely on more artifacts to deal with this kind of challenge. After 100 years in the wall of the reflecting realm, he was very experienced in dealing with these resentment spirits. But it was different for these two monsters. To Ding Shan, this kind of arrangement was originally just a way to escape. After all, according to his judgment, the people who came were very likely to have rich experience in dealing with spirit bodies like him. But now, since it was two brats who thought they were monsters, he didn't mind ruthlessly eliminating them. A large number, hundreds of resentment spirits rushed over and instantly surrounded the three of them. They didn't have any obvious preference, and their instinctive obsession was stimulated by the indigo pearls. At this time, any human cultivator was their target, and there was no distinction between them. This kind of sudden situation completely disrupted Thimble and Li Fan's rhythm. They also didn't know where so many resentment spirits came from. They only knew that rays of indigo light rapidly shot over, followed by large groups of spirit bodies. Ding Shan immediately started his own defense. He didn't want to kill them, but his goal was to not anger these spirit bodies. Then, he would make a decision after seeing the reactions of these two brats. Thimble and Li Fan's reactions were the opposite. After all, there was a difference of several thousand years between them, so their actions were more proactive and more aggressive. Otherwise, why would they be called monsters? The resentment spirits' attacks towards the three of them were indiscriminate. Based on this principle, charging towards Ding Shan was the most proactive way to kill. They didn't want to choose to defend separately. Who knew how many resentment spirits this old half-immortal could attract? If the three of them were busy dealing with the spirit bodies, Ding Shan would have countless opportunities to escape. As long as the news of the two of them spread, it was hard to say whether or not the exterior cultivators would come to trouble them. But don't forget, there were still 50 interior half-immortals here who were also doing the killing mission. For the two of them, such a choice was undoubtedly the right choice. The only thing they didn't consider too clearly was the estimation of the number of spirit bodies rushing over. Just as they broke into Ding Shan's close-range defense circle, the number of resentment spirits had already reached a terrifying number of thousands, and it was still increasing endlessly. Thimble and Li Fan found themselves in a quagmire. With such a dense degree, as long as they attacked Ding Shan, they would inevitably attract the crazy revenge of the spirit bodies. They would think that this was an attack on them. So now, Ding Shan obediently attacked and didn't fight back. He defended in a well-behaved manner. At least by doing so, the surrounding spirit bodies wouldn't fall into a state of madness. But he also had a problem. It was precisely because of his overly weak performance that the two brats of the exterior broke into the inner circle and stuck close to him. Thus, he lost the opportunity to leave alone. Both sides had achieved their goals, but they also didn't achieve it. The battle between the two sides turned into a three-sided melee, and the one who gained the advantage in the battle was actually the third party. In the mirror, situations like this where one accidentally got surrounded by spirit bodies were everywhere. In theory, as long as one had enough elemental energy reserves, they would have the ability to escape. But they couldn't escape not because of the huge number of spirit bodies, but because of each other's human opponents. Chapter 1989. Both sides were persevering, waiting for the other to make a mistake, waiting for an opportunity to change. Don't worry. His elemental energy reserves are not as good as ours. We'll wait until he can't hold on and is ready to escape, then we'll attack. Thimble said coldly. It was quite vexing for a battle that was bound to be won to end up like this. However, even though she was vexed, she couldn't lose her judgment. Inside the reflecting mirror wall, spirit was extracted in proportion. Therefore, even if the other's cultivation was slightly deeper than theirs, under the proportion, they would definitely collapse before them. They had rushed straight for the spirit treasure after entering, so their reserves were much stronger than Ding Shan, who had been guarding this place the entire time. Li Fan laughed sinisterly. Don't attack him, just keep him occupied. I want him to die under the resentment of the spiritual bodies. Ding Shan had achieved his goal. But the problem was that he didn't expect two opponents to come at once, so he couldn't use the means he had prepared. He was very clear that as long as he used his trump card, it was hard to say whether he could get rid of one of the two, but he would definitely be torn to pieces by the other and countless spiritual bodies. He had prepared a meal for one person, but two guests had come. He sighed deeply in his heart. A half-immortal like him, who wasn't very good at fighting, was actually very depressed and full of powerlessness when he was in a real dangerous situation. He had pulled the two evildoers into the sea of spiritual bodies, but he had also pulled himself into a dilemma. But he didn't regret it. At least, he still had one last move. He would continue to waste time. Even if his ability withered, how strong could the opponent be? 1 for 2, it didn't seem to be a loss. This was a very special battle, especially when the two sides hadn't even fought each other, but the direction of the battle had already been decided. The fierce battle attracted the attention of passing cultivators, and two half-immortals passed by. Because of the crazy gathering of resentment of the spiritual bodies, they were attracted to see what was going on. Then they left, and no one reached out to help. When the interior half-immortal saw that it was an exterior half-immortal, he didn't even think and turned around to leave. The exterior half-immortal left half a sentence. I'll call for help. Originally, the cultivation world was a cold circle. If 3 cultivators quarreled and fought because of their own grievances, and attracted a huge amount of resentment of the spiritual bodies, then they were courting their own deaths. No one would put themselves in danger. Not to mention the huge risk, even if they really rescued a few people, they might not be able to escape. The situation was in a stalemate, and the 3 of them were slowly dragged into the abyss. This was because no one wanted to be the first to leave. That would mean that their movements would attract the concentrated attacks of the spiritual bodies. Ding Shan's heart was neither worried nor happy. He had thought of his end, but he hadn't thought it would end like this. At the very least, he tried. This was the first time in his life that he had encountered such an outcome. He could only sigh at the impermanence of life. What was yours. Stealing and robbing seemed to be useless. It was also at this time that another unfamiliar half-immortal came. He didn't leave immediately like the previous 2, nor did he take a closer look. Instead, he looked back and forth at the empty divine magic conch with great interest, as if he was very confused. After observing for a while, he wobbled his way to a safe distance away from the battle. Seeing that the 3 of them were in a dangerous situation, he felt at ease. Since he did not speak, Ding Shan did not open his mouth to plead either. This was because this was another so-called evildoer with a cultivation of primordial spirit. It was just that they did not know whether he was in the interior or the exterior realm. But Li Fan Thimble was very nervous. They had been in the small circle of exterior realm evildoers for many years, and knew most of the exterior realm evildoers. This person was so unfamiliar, and from his appearance, he seemed to be slightly similar to that person in the legends. He was very nervous, and did not dare to ask. Nor did he have the ability to easily escape. In recent years, a new star had risen among the 2 heavens half-immortals. Though he was definitely not as good as some second severance, 4th or 5th severance, his cruel and ruthless methods of doing things, as well as the fact that he had a large group of followers, caused every half-immortal to have misgivings. He was definitely not the strongest half-immortal, but as the strongest evildoer, and the leader of a new force in the change of the previous era, his position was very clear and unquestionable. Then, was it this person or not? This person just watched quietly from the side, not speaking, and did not have any inclination. Ding Shan also felt the pressure from this person's silence. Just standing there quietly, he could clearly feel that the two half-immortals had begun to make slight mistakes when dealing with the countless resentful spiritual bodies. Being surrounded by the spiritual bodies as well, his feeling could not be wrong. He had to be an important figure. But Ding Shan did not think that this would definitely be beneficial to him. Because he, too, had his own selfish thoughts. He sighed in his heart. If a cultivator could not hold on to himself, he would fall into such a predicament, not daring to speak in front of a true elite, because he felt guilty. Thimble's divine sense told him, "Fellow cultivator Ding, there are outsiders spying on us." Their intentions are unclear, and their origins are unclear. I fear that an accident will happen, and the three of us will fall here without knowing why. Why don't we each take a step back? The three of us will each flee separately, and what happens after will depend on the will of the heavens. Ding Shan's heart was slightly moved. To be honest, his current magic power reserves had already reached the edge of the danger line. If he wasted a little more time, not to mention whether he could deal with the attacks of others, just these resentful spiritual bodies would be able to take his life. Even ants would drag out their lives, let alone humans. If there was such an opportunity, everyone would flee separately, and save their lives. Everything else could be discussed later. But, was it really like this? Thousands of years of cultivation experience made him not think simply. Though his battle prowess was indeed limited, to be able to cultivate to his current level, he naturally had his own unique points. I think it's very good now. Continuing to waste time like this is much more interesting than cooperating with the two of you. The two evildoers were secretly annoyed. This person was stubborn. He had made up his mind that even if he died, he would drag them along with him. With a touch of divine sense, they had already made a decision. As a half-immortal, the foundation of the way of battle was to control the situation by oneself. It was impossible to let one's own magic power be consumed to the point of being at the mercy of others. Moreover, this person might not necessarily be that demon god. The two of them made a decision and began to prepare to flee. When dealing with the resentful spiritual bodies around them, there were some slight changes. This was a process that required careful consideration. How not to take away too many spiritual bodies, how to gradually get rid of the siege of the spiritual bodies, and how to transfer the spiritual bodies' attacks to others when someone obstructed them. At this moment, a wandering spiritual body floated to the side of the cultivator who was quietly watching the fun. He only felt a flash of light, and the spiritual body turned into nothingness. At the same time, a flying sword floated and hovered beside the cultivator. The cultivator opened his mouth lazily, and when everyone thought he was going to speak, they didn't expect that the flying sword would drill into his mouth to pick his teeth. Thimble Fan's heart trembled. This was terrible. Chapter 1990. They could basically confirm that this was the villain. This discovery caused the duo's plan to fail, because they had to consider the possibility of being attacked by the flying swords in the process of leaving. With their strength on the flying swords, it would be difficult for them to deal with it under normal circumstances, not to mention dragging along so many vengeful spirit bodies. They also didn't consider whether the swordsmen knew that they were one of the 100 or so demigods that were wanted. Similar guesses had been tormenting them for a long time, and now it seemed that this was the worst-case scenario. What should they do? The two were in a desperate situation. Ding Shan wasn't cooperating with them, the swordsman was threatening them from the outside, and the endless vengeful spirits were harassing them endlessly. They had to take action. Every second they wasted would weaken their elemental energy. They could only rush out and hope that the swordsman wouldn't be able to attack them both at the same time. Actually, if the two were really close friends, one would sacrifice his life to attract the attack, and the other would have a chance to escape. But this referred to the attitude of taking responsibility and treating life and death as nothing. If Lu Xiaoyi and his friends were here, they could all do this. Some would sacrifice their lives to delay the enemy, and some would swear that they wouldn't leave even if they died. Instead, they could open up the situation, or at least drag the swordsman into the siege of the vengeful spirits. But Thimble and Li Fan weren't. Husband and wife were birds in the same forest, but in the face of disaster, they flew separately. Although they were both wanted criminals and had some friendship, it was still far from a friendship of life and death. They were just huddling together for warmth. When faced with a choice between life and death, how could they sacrifice themselves to help their friends? They had to leave immediately, so there was only one choice. The two of them left at the same time, and the swordsman's attack would depend on luck. The plan was set, and they recovered their decisiveness as demigods. Looking for an opportunity, the two of them worked together and cast Spirit Storm at the same time. Dao Realm cultivators were very picky when it came to the use of vengeful spirits. The Dao Realm cultivators had very limited methods to deal with these spirits. After all, not everyone was as knowledgeable as Lu Xiaoyi. The Spirit Storm was a very smart choice. It did not focus on destroying the vengeful spirits. Instead, it pushed them as far away as possible and spread them all over the normal space. Anyone who attacked them would be attacked by these spirits. Like a snowflake floating in the void, snowflakes cover the void. No matter if it was a forbidden technique or a flying sword, it was impossible to pass through them without causing them to react. At the same time, the two freaks flew off in different directions. For the time being, they couldn't use their spatial abilities because the significance of the spiritual storm was that the snowflakes would fill the entire battlefield, including their surroundings. Under the entanglement of these spiritual bodies, no one could free themselves to use their troublesome spatial abilities. It was also at this moment that the two of them fully revealed their plans. They all wanted their companions to attract the attention of the swordsman while they took advantage of the situation from the other side. The direct result of this was that the originally smooth escape technique had been artificially slowed down by a sliver. And the actions of their two opponents magnified the consequences of their sluggishness to the extreme. Ding Shan instinctively made the most correct response. He did not try to attack the two of them. On the contrary, he took the risk of entering the embryonic breathing state the moment the spirit storm rolled up. He lowered his aura as a half-immortal cultivator to the lowest. Even if there were still spiritual bodies attacking him, he would not resist, and would only passively endure them. His goal was very clear. After the spirit storm, the vengeful spirits would enter a frenzied state and attack the living beings they deemed as the most threatening. If he could lower his aura to the lowest level and make these spiritual bodies focus their attention on the two half-immortal monsters, then it would be a success. It would mean that the two of them had attracted the aggro of all the vengeful spirits on the battlefield. This was a risk, because the remaining spiritual bodies could possibly cause fatal damage to him if he did not fight back. The swordsman also made a slight move, and the flying sword drilled out of his mouth. They all knew that this flying sword could change into 1,000 forms in the next moment, and 1,000 forms could change into 100,000 forms. A million swords river would be the reaper of death. As half-immortals, they were very familiar with the swordsman's attack method. Once the sword river arrived, it would be a matter of life and death. They were half-immortals, and there was no chance for them to be reborn. Under such pressure, Thimble and Li Fan immediately reacted instinctively. They activated their Dao realm and used all their defensive methods. What a joke! If they did not immediately use their defensive methods after the swordsman attacked, then they would be courting death. Even if the two of them did not know who the swordsman's main target was, they still did not know. Or perhaps both of them? However, the flying sword did not split apart like they expected. It was still a single sword, and it swayed in front of the Taoist. The Taoist stretched out his hand, and began to manicure his nails. What the hell, giving birth is not giving birth, but scaring people for fun. The swordsman did not attack, and Ding Shan calmed his breathing. However, this did not mean that there was no danger. The aftereffect of the spiritual storm was that once the spiritual bodies were blown away, they would attack even more ferociously. Especially when the two of them slowed down a little, and in order to defend against the flying sword, they arranged a large defensive formation, and Ding Shan's perfect timing of holding his breath. With all these factors combined, the two monsters were like two large lanterns in the wilderness in the middle of the night, attracting countless mosquitoes and insects. Their escape failed. Not long after, the two of them were surrounded by different spiritual bodies. This time, the two of them did not choose to gather together, because they had already lost their trust in each other. Different from before, this time, the attacks of the resentful spiritual bodies were even more aggressive and frenzied. Each of them was surrounded by thousands of spiritual bodies. This was a scene that tested the strength of a cultivator. Ding Shan let out a long breath. He had suffered some injuries, but it did not affect his foundation. Fortunately, the spiritual bodies around him were attracted by the two monsters. At least for the time being, he was safe. His mana reserves were on the brink of danger, but he did not dare to leave just yet. It was not because of the two exterior monsters who could not even take care of themselves, but because of the swordsman who had already started to manicure his toenails. In the void, any normal person would not take off their shoes and socks, except for the perverts. He found it strange. If this manicure process was reversed, it did not seem to be a big deal to this kind of person. Throughout the course of the battle, he could vaguely guess the identity of the swordsman. If it were someone else, it would be impossible for them to force the two exterior monsters to this extent. They did not even say a word, nor did they attack. They just quietly watched as they slid into the abyss. Being experienced in the ways of the world, he knew what to say. Otherwise, the two of them would not keep his secret. I am Ding Shan, an exterior master. I am here only to steal the treasure. Before the treasure is in my hands, I have brought disaster upon myself. If there is punishment, I will accept it. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.